Got it.
All right, we are live. Hi everyone, I am really excited to interview Adam Sheather. He is co-founder of Bad Monkeys. He is managing director of Bimbeats and Automation. I have been following his discourse on uh, Discord and Twitter, and he has amazing thoughts and approach. And I really admire his way of thinking. And we have been discussing his projects, and he has a whole spectrum of things he has done uh, in his career. So I'm very excited to know his journey, how he developed those, what were some insights. And thanks a lot, Adam, for your time to do this.
No, I know we've been talking about it for a while and planned it and had some false start. So it's good that we finally got to do it. So thank you for having me on.
Awesome. So my first question is, Adam, uh, since your bachelor's to what in your current role, what were some pivotal moments in your career which made you decide to do learn software development or do Dynamo, like some pivotal moments?
Well, I never did my bachelor's. I am I am not university educated. I attempted uni, I think 4 times. I've done various attempts at bachelor's, but I ended up just going through more just my career by learning on the role and then teaching myself. So I started off in scaffolding, actually. I left high school and started scaffolding, literally carrying scaffold around. And then an opportunity came up to work in the office. And because I'd had AutoCAD experience from high school, which was reasonably rare back then, we were the first year when I was in high school to implement AutoCAD and have it in the office in the school. So I put my hand up and they're like, oh, great, we don't have to teach you. And so, yeah, they had quite a sophisticated system there. So they had an AutoCAD add-on. It was actually on a computer chip that you'd insert into the PC that would do 3D scaffolding. And this was in the late 90s. So you would scan your plan in, you would get the outline of the plan, and then I would draw these intelligently wired scaffolding components in 2D, and then give them all the heights and cross bracing as all these little interactive widgets in AutoCAD. And it would generate the full 3D, give me the quantity takeoff, all of that stuff straight out of AutoCAD. I had to hit F2 and then it'd give me the quantities, copy and paste it into Excel and things like this. But that was sort of the first package I learned on. So then when I then went into industry and people were using at that time AutoCAD, I was like, what the heck is this? Like just bare bones AutoCAD. Because I'm like, then they weren't able to get quantities and you like measuring all this stuff. And so I was kind of lucky that I started in a firm that had, for whatever reason at that time, had chosen to go down that path and build that. And then probably my attraction to, I guess, doing what I've done has always been trying to just make things more efficient when I find myself repeating. And I think people have said this all the time. So the first notable project that I remember was at that firm. You do all this fancy stuff with the scaffold. We get the quantities out right, but then we would go and like type. They would like print it or paste it in Word and then manually type it all into this spreadsheet and then run all these hand calcs on calculating the total. And that's how we'd come up with our tender price. And I was like, oh, okay. So we're doing all this smart stuff. And then as soon as we hit this change in medium, it just went all back to like handwriting and all of this. So I spent a few weeks writing this Excel template. It wasn't very fancy, but I could copy and paste my results straight from AutoCAD into that. And then it had another page with all the references filled in. So it would automatically start calculating and optimizing and running my rough costs. And I could add my additional variables and stuff like that. And then break it down by phase. And it would give me my tender pricing. So again, I went from like the guys would normally spend 2-3 hours per tender price for a smaller job, like sub 100K, to again like 5 minutes, and you'd have it. And then the boss would be like, "Oh, can you play with this number, play with that?" And because it's all there, you're just doing it that way. Whereas these guys was just like write it all on paper, type a proposal. So that was sort of my first foray into automating. And then I went to work for a structural engineering company after that as a technician. Did that for And again, first day I worked in the door and they're like, oh, okay, so you're, junior, yeah? And I'm like, yep, yep. And they're like, okay, so your main job is to print drawings. Again, this is early to print drawings, swap out the toner, things like that. And so back then, the way they had their procedure set up was you get told, print these 40 drawings. So you'd open up each drawing, you'd go into the layout, you'd window the layout, and you'd hit print. You'd do the next one, next one, next one. Anyway, so a few days into that, I'm like, this is terrible. There's got to be a better way of doing this. And so I looked, a little bit of research. That's the publish feature in AutoCAD. And so I set up a publish template, and then I just started automating my prints. So sort of a couple of weeks into that job, I'm like, I've automated the printing. And they're like, that's meant to be like 80% of your job. So how about you just start drawing the pool? So then I moved into the pool design and then moved up into some of the international work. So again, I kind of found like by automating these things, people wouldn't get upset or be like, oh, well, you've automated that, we'll fire you, and now we can get one of the other guys to do it. It was more like, okay, how do we move on to the next thing? So I found automating my not so exciting work just got me moving into more exciting work pretty quickly. And then from there, I discovered Revit around 2003-ish, just as Revit Structure 1 was coming out. Got involved with that. I pushed really hard. The firm that I was working for gave me a license, which was nice of them. And I was just building things from scratch, getting my head around it, and talking a lot with the reseller and sending them what I was working on. And I did a few high-rise towers back then, which was pretty early. They're very shameful towers because there's a unfortunate amount of in-place families and all sorts of other terrible hacks in them. A bunch of no-nos, but that's how you learn, right? I was just redrawing my CAD projects in Revit. Anyway, the reseller came back and went, oh, wow, you're doing a lot of stuff here. Would you like to come work with us? And so I spent a few years first training, doing a lot of the training in sort of the early 2000s, and then mostly architects and then engineers, structural MEP. So learned all three flavors, and then moved into more project support and management. So some of the earliest, in Australia, some of the earliest multi-Revit user, like the architect using Revit, the engineer using Revit, the MEP using Revit. I was involved in hospitals and things like helping them set it up because it was everyone's first time of doing that, right? So back then it was like, okay, how do we link all these models together? And what happens when we move this and that? And should we be hosting anything? And so was there for a few years. It was really good experience. Did a lot of work, Australia and overseas, and that's when I got a passion for speaking. And then went and worked for a 4D company back in 2007 or 8. I left them for a 4D company. Unfortunately, the company wasn't that good, but the work was really interesting. So we moved into, we were working on a courthouse in Brisbane here in Australia. And so my first task was like, we've got this schedule of 50,000 tasks, and we need to sync this to this facade system. But the purpose wasn't just about showing the facade getting created. We were actually mapping which work crews need to be assigned to which panel types, and we had a minimum amount of working crews. So this project had a real 4D remit, and I think this is before the marketing spin was on the 4D, because there's definitely a bit of marketing associated with it now. But really, all the 4D that we were doing back then was analyzing can we get the trades in and out in 15 minutes in these? Because we had false flooring and then the surfaces below rather than the ceiling. So can we get the trades moving in and out of the areas? Can we optimize the facade crews to work on the facade type? So we were working for the contractor. So this was all during construction. There was no 4D done to win the job. This was all how do we pull apart this model to analyze and optimize these crew sequences? Which cages should be prefabbed down on the ground? Reinforcement cages should be prefabbed and then craned, and which ones should just be done on site? So that was my first experience with 4D. And so then I did that project for them, and then we worked on a tunnel sinking project. So we were sinking some tunnels in Perth for new rail lines. And again, the 4D there was less about we're going to build some tunnel sinkings. We showed some jet grouting and how to sink the subway line, which was quite interesting as well. But most of it was about the rail operations, which tracks need to stay on, when are we turning the other tracks off, and then what works are happening during those operations. So a lot of the 4D for me was very much about achieving outcomes and providing risk mitigation rather than tower goes up, tower goes down animations. So the animations were sort of, funny enough, the animations were mostly a means to end of the process. We rarely showed the actual results. So the client, you know, our contractor groups that we're working with would just come back and go, yeah, we can get it done like this. We've got to assign the crews like this. Rarely were they showing anything. I think the only ones that we showed were like rebar ones where it was showing like how to put some really complex reinforcement cages together for the crews so they could quickly assemble it. And then from there, went to work for another engineering firm and rolled out Revit for them. Then went overseas to the Philippines for a few years. Rolled out, helped the team there roll out Revit in Philippines, and then managed it was quite a large team, it's about 150 odd technicians and engineers. So I was involved in mining, and it really expanded my view because I was sort of overseeing things from a CAD and BIM. Then I went to Malaysia and worked for a Chinese contractor there that was fully integrated. And I know I've seen a lot of discussions around fully integration, but these guys, and you hear, you know, the Katera and all of this sort of stuff. This company called YTL. And so we were completely integrated. And it's one of the few places where I've ever seen it. So we built for ourselves. Every single one of our jobs was a job that the company decided to build. So the company builds hotels, residential, they flip the residential, hotels they build and own and maintain. They do 4G, they own the 4G network over there. They do some other projects, build. So the only person we would ever occasionally build for is a government in like in various swap deals and initiatives like that, or some rail projects, things like that. And so we had a design team of about 120. We had a construction group of about 1,500. And we were the overhead of the business, right? So the total group, YTL started in the 50s, 1955. It's now worth, I think they've got over 60 billion in assets. They own 30 or 40% of the concrete supply to Malaysia and Myanmar and places like that. We had our own rebar group. All the rebar was done internal. So my job there was like rolling out Revit across the design group, but then also interfacing and working quite heavily with our construction team on integrating there. And that was an amazing experience. We were amazingly profitable in terms of the work that we did. The environment was really good, and the longevity of the team was always there. So the people, YTL's a very, I didn't know, I was quite ignorant of all of this at the time, but in Malaysia, it's quite a prestigious, it's seventh or sixth richest private business. Well, it's got it on the public, but it's one of the richest businesses. The owners are sixth or seventh richest people in Malaysia as well. But their focus is, you know, heavily on like cost, building at low cost, but achieving the quality. So they built the high-speed rail from the airport in KL. I don't know if you've been to KL, but there's a high-speed rail from the airport to Central. And that was done for $10 million per kilometer, which is astoundingly cheap. And again, there's just this amazing focus of the groups all working together that I've just never seen anywhere else, because no one could sue each other. There's no litigation or anything like that. Both the construction team and the design team were an overhead. And we were treated and respected as overhead. So as a result, there was never any profit drives. We never tried to make extra money, or like the hardest part was variations from on top. So we were involved in one particular tower where we got a variation like the week we were meant to start construction on those apartment types. Oh, sorry, 2 weeks. And it was like, I know we had these 2-bedder apartments, but we need a 1-bedder separate with a second 1-bedder separate that could be a 2-bedder. And so we had 2 weeks to reorganize that, re-optimize it with stuff we've already ordered and all that to get it out to site. So that was fantastic experience. I really appreciate it. And fortunately, I've been able to continue working with those guys once I come back with automation, which is great. So yeah, one of my favorite teams and one of the most respected architects I've ever met. I had the privilege of working for him there. He's involved in the resort stuff. So yeah, amazing guy. One of those people who always knew what he wanted to build. So Revit and those sort of things, it was never coming to look as a validation. It was more just like, oh yeah, you've got the right idea. Like, yeah, just one of those people mentally was, the whole vision was always there. Fantastic. So anyway, went from there to AECOM back in Australia with the family. I've got kids and everything, so we thought it was time. Led the APAC regional technical applications group. So it was a combination of working on a lot of high-level BIM frameworks for a lot of the major infrastructure projects that we were working on in Australia, helping out with a lot of those sort of bids, getting the civil team up and running at that time. That became a focus to get the civil team BIM enabled. So I worked quite heavily getting the bridge guys up and running. And then also building and working with the GIS team to build technical apps and roll out various add-ons for Revit across the group as well. And then after that, we got enough work during the Bad Monkey stuff. I didn't even cover that. To then start we started the Bad Monkeys back when I was in Malaysia as a group, but then Bad Monkeys started getting enough work where we could go out on our own, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Awesome. There are so many diverse roles you had, and it's interesting. It's rare to find companies who are doing affordable projects, but also maintaining the quality, and it's great. So I'm very curious to know how did you guys came up with the name Bad Monkey? How you met, and what was the culture like? It sounded like you guys were the OG in AEC Tech at that time.
It was quite well. It was all Marcelo actually, and this was prior to my involvement. I can't remember what Bad Monkey I was. I was 5 or 6 or something like that. So Marcelo, I think Marcelo, Havard, and Julian, and the guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Definitely Marcelo and Havard created. So originally, this is back when Dynamo was 0.4 or something like that. So it was barely out of the ground. So Marcelo and Havard started, I think, working on stuff. And then Julian joined them from Paris. I think he was based there at the time. He's now in Oslo. And then Conrad came on board as well, because Conrad Sobin was doing his stuff. And then I can't remember if I was around that time when I was at YTL, and there's a video of it. I had to do an interesting project where we had to calculate about 9,000 concrete panels being poured. I had no idea how to do it. So I ended up, I did create a YouTube channel and I submitted. So I've got this, I built this precast yard in Revit, and you could, I don't know if you've seen it, and yeah, you could program when you want all the precast panels and then end up doing a just-in-time delivery. Then that was for a real ongoing project. And so Dynamo was the only way I was able to integrate my schedule. I butchered it down to Excel, cleaned it up, and then I'm like, oh, it looks like this Dynamo thing can probably do what I'm needing. And so I released that. And then at that time, I guess that was pretty interesting. And then I released the Dynaworks package at the same time, because I'd written some integrations for that. And that's when I think Havard reached out and was like, hey, looks like you know what you're doing. And I'm like, not really. And he's like, cool, none of us know what we're doing either. How about we all chat about it? And so, yeah, we just became a Facebook group where we'd all just, share problems, and the Dynamo community was just sort of getting up and share problems on there. And so we all became really good friends from that point onwards. And so we then moved from Dynamo to Slack and set up a big tips and tricks. More just we just help each other out with problems. And that, then we share a lot with the community, more the other guys than me. I think everyone's released a package, but I haven't. I've done one major update on my package since, because Navisworks doesn't have too much, whereas Conrad and Andreas are much more adding a lot more features and things like that to the Clockwork package, and same with Dimitar with Springs all the time. And then eventually we thought, let's all get together. So we got together a couple of years ago in Norway. Which was really, really fun. That was the only time. Dimitar was the only one who couldn't make it, but yeah, we had a bunch of Bad Monkeys up in the snow, falling down hills and all sorts of things. But yeah, and that was around the time we were starting to get serious. We were being asked to it was interesting moving from oh, this is cool and I'm happy to help you out for free, to people going, hey, would you like some money and build this thing for us? And then, going through that experience of well, do we take money? Do we want to be money? What do each of us want to do? What do we want to be as a group? Is this a company now? Is this? So that was, yeah. And eventually we all realized I guess we're all chiefs. So we all had our own ideas. And so while we collaborate really well together, I think we all realized that having one of us in charge of the others was never going to work. We're too busy running free. And then there's the other guys who just were never interested in going down the route of starting a business. They've got really good jobs, really good positions, doing really interesting work, right? So I think people think that you're going and starting a company is a really exciting thing, but a lot of the time you're invoicing and chasing clients for things, and you do less of the cool stuff than when you're actually at a company being paid to do cool stuff. But that's pretty much how it all started and went. And then we got to present in Porto was the first one where we all did a Bad Monkeys Prezzo, and that was quite interesting. Porto was probably our most active period. So this was a built that was hosted in Porto a few years ago, and 25% of the talks were done by Bad Monkeys at that time.
Ooh.
At the whole conference, 25% of them were by Bad Monkeys. Marcelo and Julian and Avad and myself, we were all doing like 3 or 4 classes each. And then we did one lab where we all did a lab together for best tips and tricks and stuff like that, which was really, really fun. And then, yeah, from there, I think what happened, like, especially the last couple of years, is as we've all branched out, everyone's just gotten busy. So we're less, and the technology scape has grown so big since like 3 or 4 years ago. It was like, you had Revit and then this Dynamo thing just emerging. And then, Havad was still like tinkering with Grasshopper, and Grasshopper's just exploded. And definitely I'm not a Grasshopper guy. I can open it and tinker. Like we went and got someone and brought someone on who's Mike. Mike is much smarter than me when it comes to that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's definitely exploded where there's this massive bunch of tech now where you're using Rhino inside and Grasshopper sometimes, and sometimes it's a Dynamo script, and sometimes it's a Revit add-on, sometimes it's a macro, and like being able to provide and navigate that for clients has become really key, because you just don't know when to use which. And even if it is a Dynamo script, is it all Python? Is it just nodes? If it's Grasshopper, are you adding C# add-ons, or are you just doing, how each of these scripts are then made up as well, become a big part of the user experience from a computational side. And then the other big part for us, which is a bit different from the other guys, because I started trying to teach myself to program back in probably about 2009 or 2010. And this was before Dynamo came out. So I'm actually on the other spectrum where I went and learned C# first. So I'm like C# guy first, Python second, a little bit of JavaScript, and then Dynamo sort of after that. So I sort of spent probably 2 years learning C# because I sucked at it. Like I would do a book, I'd buy a book and I'd read it and I'd hammer out all the exercise. I'd get through that book and I'm like, I have no idea what I just did. No idea. And I'd do it again, get frustrated, put it down for a couple of months, come back to it, do it again. And probably about the 6th time that I did that, I think I'd done it by that time enough times where it finally all clicked. And so that really helped. And then fortunately enough, it was really crazy back then, because this is when like Autodesk couldn't get anyone to learn the Revit API, right? They couldn't. So at that time, I got a call from Autodesk. They're like, oh, hey, we're flying Jeremy Tamick down for a week. It's for free. So you get to spend a whole week for free working with Jeremy Tamick on the Revit API. Are you interested? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, thank goodness. No one wants to do this course. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like a week with Jeremy? That's insane. So convinced my boss to fly me to Melbourne at the time and got to spend a week on the Revit API with Jeremy hands on. And that was amazing. That just like lifted my eyes, and I was able to do so much. So I came back with a real solid foundation of starting to write add-ons. And then I went from there. And then from there, we started branching out and making more sophisticated systems. And I took a little bit of a break. I started writing like Revit template creators and things like that. And then once automation came up, I brought on a guy to join me as one of the founders with automation. He's a heavy senior software architect, so he's got heavy cloud infrastructure background, worked in fintech, worked in health tech. And so me and him worked really well on formulating the ideas, writing it up, but then being able to provide these robust cloud solutions for clients. And that's sort of one of the areas that we've been doing ever since.
I see. There's a lot of stuff to take. So I'm curious, like, so you were at the early trends of Dynamo, and when you saw that people are adopting, were you very bullish that this is gonna change the way we work 10 years from now? Or were you guys like, what was the like discussion among you guys that how we can take this to the next level?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I was ever like bullish on it. Like oh, this is the future. Like, I think at that time, because I was so heavy, the only times I was using Dynamo was to solve like work problems. So I've always come from it from a, okay, I've got a problem. How can I solve it? What tool can I use to solve it with? Right. And so I was more just interested in like, this is solving my problems. I definitely wouldn't have said like, oh yeah, Dynamo is going to become this huge thing. Like, and like, it was just like, oh, well, this is helping me do all this extra stuff. But I guess in hindsight, because it allows you to do such diverse things. So like one of the things that, we talked about was the precast system, but I used to, we had this complex spiral in staircase that we needed to design out of pure concrete, and the handrail was all integrated. And so I ended up just creating a script that unwrapped all the edges so that the guys could produce the formwork for the molds for the staircase. So it had all these really diverse users. So like the value of Dynamo is it's almost like a CPU. It's sort of like general purpose AEC computing. And same for Grasshopper. Like you can really do a lot of general like yes, you can use it for production automation, and I think in later years, especially once we became automation, because we've helped do like computational strategies for companies who are just learning how to do this. And, I really now just break it into three buckets. So for visual programming, and, the first one is really like the design side of things. So, hey, I'm an engineer. I can write this thing with Dynamo and Excel that can design a column for me or do a design activity. The second one being like interop. I can take data from Excel and move it into Revit and Revit to Excel or Grasshopper or whatever. And then the third one's really that automation production, like, hey, I can auto tag this drawing or generate 50 sections and place them. And so that's sort of where I've landed in the three main use cases for AEC visual programming, sort of fits in one of those three buckets. And I haven't had too many, I don't think I had too many deviations. So I try and get people to think about whenever you're doing a Dynamo task, is it an automation problem? Is it a interrupt problem? Or is it a design problem that you're trying to solve? And put that mindset around how you approach that script. And then the other part is, who are you building these things for? I think that's been the more interesting part with computational design, because like if you're building something for yourself, right, it can be spaghetti code, spaghetti nodes, it can be ugly, all the things that you run around your office going, don't you ever do this, is the things you get to do. It's like an early concept design model, right? Like, don't use this, don't use that. And then you go and open someone's early concept design. Broken every rule in the book, but you're trying to quickly iterate. You're under time constraints, so it's totally acceptable. And no one else is meant to use that model, right? Like at the end of the day, those models are like, they're meant to be like, you grab a screenshot out of it and then clean it up in Photoshop or something. That's the end use of those models. But once a script starts getting used by other people, and same with models, you've got to put a whole bunch of rigor around it. Like, what is the user interface going to look like? Is there a user interface? What's the error handling going to be like? So if your end user gets like point reference missing, what the heck does that mean? Nothing, right? So you need to wrap that and be like, hey, you forgot to press this button, do this and that instead. So it's interesting that the development of scripts suddenly becomes a lot longer than what you used to do, because all of a sudden you really got to think like the mass market, okay, how can all my users play with this thing? And then, how do we wrap those up in ways that they can, be guided quite clearly? And then do you use things like the data shape package, which is awesome, and Dynamo Player to further wrap these experiences and remove the user from, down to a click button if they need to, because people still get quite intimidated just by even opening Dynamo. So that's been the interesting thing in the last few years. That the hardest part, though, is when you choose to scale any sort of scripting. I think Grasshopper falls in the same bucket. You quickly run into a limitation when you're scaling amongst users. Like I think in inner office and maybe a couple of offices, you can do it. When you're trying to push these things out, like you've got to have real discipline principles around like what packages are installed on everyone's machines, what version of Dynamo is installed on everyone's machines, because they just break so easy. And then those are the times when you start to think like, okay, do we need to step this into a C# package and things? And a lot of that, though, is where I think people forget, though, and they don't wrap it up properly in business cases by actually tracking who's using these apps. So there's one company, a large engineering firm that I work quite a bit with, and they did this, and they've got really sophisticated mechanisms where they track like Dynamo script usage and how often those scripts are used. And they use that, and then they assign like very simple, like this script would save you X amount of time. And they use those metrics to go back to the shareholders of the board every quarter and go, look, we know these guys are using this script that's taking whatever amount of time. We also know that they're having this many errors. We know that because you can track the errors when Dynamo gets run, we know that if we invest and turn this into a C# script, it's going to cost about X because we've already written the logic. Therefore, we're going to diminish these errors and improve the reports. And then so they actually validate that movement from taking a script to a C# just through those analytics. And that's what management likes to see. Dollars time. Like if you can speak that language to management, that's where you're going to get value. And a lot of it is about benchmarking. Like we were here, now we're here. We've measured this difference. The difference is worth this in time or dollars. Therefore, we know where to reinvest. And it also reinforces like the hardest part with computational designers is it's still a bit of a black box industry where people don't know what you sort of do. And most companies only have one or two, right? Bigger companies have a couple, but they're the dude that sits in the corner and magically fires get put out. That's probably how most of it. But then there's a challenge for those guys if you really want to scale this. Like there's things that I want to work on, and then there's things that clearly need to be worked on. And so you've got to be disciplined with yourself to go like, I really want to do this cool little widget thing. It's going to be awesome. But I know right now our team is using like this sheet attribute generator and it fills out the revisions and then automatically saves into Excel. Now, I personally could not care about revisions in Excel, but that is a thing that's getting used like 50 times a day. And if I make that slightly better, the return to the business is way bigger. So you've got to be really disciplined about like making decisions that are cool and interesting versus like, yeah, this stuff is boring, but the scale of the boring stuff is helping so many more people move from that mundane to the more exciting tasks as well. So yeah, it's interesting for people to make those choices as well. But without having that data, you just go, oh, well, I'll work on the cool thing because I think that other thing I wrote is awesome already and it's doing all right. But if you're not tracking when it's falling over, how many people are using it, why aren't other groups using it? I would say you're not doing the full job as a full, computational lead or whatever, really getting that benchmarking, showing the growth because it helps you and it helps you get funding from your teams.
I see. And like 2 points which I'd like to clarify. So I have seen that like there are many amazing tools and scripts which are developed, but because of like lack of better user interface or lack of like onboarding process, they are not that widely accepted or adopted. And you mentioned about like metrics about quantifying how much investment versus the return by using the scripts and savings in timing. So I just started the industry, but like I'm curious, like sometimes how do you quantify those kind of stuff? Because it seems like non-intuitive to do that.
Yeah, like I think in answer to your first question, I think the problem is, and look, I'm definitely guilty of this too, is computational designers, especially if you're building stuff for other people, right? If you're building stuff for yourself, then it doesn't matter. When you're building stuff for people, yeah, wrapping the UI and making those sort of things better is one thing. But then making videos and then training material and then actually setting aside the time and being like, hey team, I'm doing a lunch and learn on Friday. You as that person need to do all those initiatives. Like you can't just do the whole, well, I've written the script now, I've put it onto our network drive. Now my job is done, right? You've done 50% of your job, right? Your product even working, like you need to know when it's falling over. And these are like the best value is to look at the software development industry because they're like 10 years ahead of all the things. Like you look at all the failures right now with Dynamo and even Grasshopper do a bit, but like there's no real nice ability to do unit testing. There's no real nice way to centralize analytics. There's no real nice way to do this product maintenance piece once you release your scripts in the wild, right? Like we've got this being able to create a script and be able to deploy it. But you look at every other product out there that no one is sitting there going, great, I've released Revit. Now I'm done. I don't need to capture when errors happen or any of this. Like there's this whole part, like, are you enjoying the script? Are you using it? There's the training. And it's quite easy to fall in the trap because again, making videos, I'm terrible at this stuff, right? Like making videos, I'm terrible. If you look at Dynamo forums from Bad Monkeys, I think there's like 7 posts And almost all of them are when like someone like from Autodesk or someone has bugged me and they go, "Hey Adam, there's a post from Dynaworks on the forum. Can you please go look at it for me?" Because that's just not what I do. So I'm quite guilty of like not preparing good manuals, not doing good videos, and I've really had to sort of discipline myself when you build that stuff to really set aside that time. And I would say that your product isn't finished until you've done those unit tests yourself. Like the other thing is unit testing. Like, have you robustly tested your script, or did you get it working for your one scenario and then issued it? Because as soon as users have a bad experience with your script, it immediately puts them off. And you as a user can relate to that. Like as soon as you try any new software, if it's slow or janky or buggy, you're immediately like, won't be using this again, right? And so you've blown that chance. And you can repair those relationships, especially internally. You can force repair those relationships, but if you didn't do it in the first place, you wouldn't have to repair anything, right? So yeah, I think there's this massive part that and this is all coming under the heading of DevOps in software, where really studying those feedback loops and building that should really be part. If you're building solutions for others, internally or externally, should be a real core part of how you approach visual development, just the same as software development. The parallels are identical. Yeah, you're still building tools for other users.
Yeah, I totally feel that there's a lot of stuff to learn from software development, so especially in open source way of collaborating. So
yeah, and we don't have to invent it. That's the coolest part, right? Like there's a whole bunch of people who've done all the work for us. Like there is very little in our industry that we really have to invent these days. Like, you look at all the fancy things that people are doing with Grasshopper and Dynamo. When you pull it apart, it's all sitting under like Veroni or Pathfinding A-Star or all these algorithms that were defined some as early as like the 50s to 70s, 80s. Like all the hard stuff's been done for us. Like you don't have to reinvent the wheel almost 99.9% of the time. I don't think I've ever had to invent something totally unique. It's just a bit of Googling, pick 2 or 3 things, test which one is having the most success, discard the other 2. Is sort of been my philosophy with those things, which is awesome. Like we don't have to invent. There's so much stuff to grab, and then our inventions are really the accumulation of or the rearrangement of those ideas in different ways.
Yeah, I just had a thought. Like I was working on this research where my main proposal was like the future architects or computational designer would be might adopt more like a collaborative API integration, and like instead of developing the whole script from scratch, and it's more about like scanning the whole landscape, identifying and doing research about what's available, and then putting those pieces together and getting your work done.
Yeah, it would be interesting how collaborative you can make visual programming. I'm yet to see any like really good examples of that. And again, like there's some other industries that have some really powerful visual programming. Like I don't know if you've seen Houdini, but Houdini is flipping amazing. Like the learning curve is horrifically steep. Like I've played, like there's an apprentice version, I think, the free version just for playing around. And I played around, but holy moly, I'm so out of my depth. But wow, the things that people can do in that is mind blowing. But even that has a non-collaborative approach. Like there's no collaboration version, so you kind of wonder like something that is node first, like that software is a node first software. You're like, okay, is it because it doesn't make sense to collaborate at that level, or is it because the industry is not ready to do that? Because the parallels should be similar, because in any case, I would think the parallels are even worse in the VFX gaming industry, because people have control over a model. Like you've got the modeler, you've got the texturer artist doing totally different stuff to the modeler, you've got the animator, and they're working on the same object. So it's like literally that same model element, which architectures, our AEC is not even close to. We still can't even have the architect and the engineer like work on the same column. They have to have copies and then they follow each other. So the fact that these guys are able to work already at that level and they're still not doing collaboration, you kind of wonder like, is it because it doesn't make sense to? Is it because the industry hasn't matured to do that? Or is it because you need, like you said, when it comes to collaborating, like open source, I think the reason that, and from my readings anyway, the reason that trustless collaboration has been able to grow so big in the last sort of 10, 15 years on the open source is purely the invention of the pull request. That ability where anyone can grab that data set and you don't care who it is, make adjustments to your code, make adjustments to the code, and then submit that back for approval. And you get to review that information and decide whether or not that's a good or bad thing for your project. And even if it's not, they can continue to use the version that they've invented. I think that that feature alone, and I know Linus Torvald actually hates the invention of pull requests from just reading YouTubes or whatever, and he invented Git for those who aren't aware. But that invention was so good for trustless collaboration, which is, that ability, which would enable those abilities. I think something similar, that you still need some level of gateway, but at the same time, sure, if it doesn't get into your main system, they can keep collaborating on their own copy and their own flavor as well. So yeah, I don't know how those things seep their way in, but there's definitely, again, there's lessons learned that are already out there.
I see. Yeah, and that not only provides like faster feedback, but also improvement on top of your code, which is like sometimes the feedback loop in our industry is longer than compared to other industries. But coming back to your point you mentioned earlier about like the need of like open source and that kind of tool. Like I have seen like Twitter threads where people are like frustrated and sharing that we need like Figma like tool for AEC, which is like they have like UX designers are loving it. Why don't we have those? So there are a set of people who feel the need. I'm not sure like is the developer community not currently interested in that problem or?
I think, well, I guess it depends how, like we use Figma for our work at Automation because we got three core businesses. So we got our software development group, which does everything from Revit plugins to all the hard parts, like full scalable AWS, Azure, enterprise microservice database solutions we've done for various companies. We've got our computational group, which is basically Dynamo, Grasshopper. Sometimes we support projects, sometimes we won't. We've written some scripts to do some pretty big automated layout stuff. And then we've got, it's a horrible term. We termed it a couple of years ago. We called it the design science group. And this is like our ML stuff that we talked about and sort of our R&D group where we do wishy-washy things and all of those sort of stuff. And we just termed it design science. It's not really science. It's a sort of an approach. But anyway, yeah, like with Figma and things like that, like, the premise is definitely there, like, but you got to unpack what they're actually saying, right? What they want is they want something like, they just want something really easy to use. Like Revit still has this high barrier of usage. Like, yes, it's easy to get in. Yes, it's easy to start drawing some walls and place some doors and windows. And it's, you got that false sense of security, not a false sense of security, but yes, it's easy. But then all of a sudden you go, okay, now I want to edit this door. And you go from like play to like woof. Oh, you've got to learn about reference planes and parametric this and association parameters. And so all of a sudden you go from a gentle learning curve to this like cliff that you've got to surmount just to make like a change to a window, right? And then not having the best content out of the box, especially for different regions, makes that even harder. So I think, and again, like then you start running into this, I've got this slightly different approach where I can't use the straight up railing tool out of the box. So all of a sudden you've got to know all the workarounds or the right workarounds to take to that. Do I use a wall? Do I do, adaptive component? Do I do, I don't know, a Grasshopper script and just place all the instances and control it? Sorry, a Dynamo script, place all the instances. Do I use Rhino inside now to do that, right? So now all of a sudden you've got like this total massive option. And of course, like you go and look around and everyone's saying their options, not the best, but that's their preferred way and all the other options are bad and every option has pros and cons. So just to make this one decision now for a slightly unique instance, there's massive decision chain and upskilling. Like, what do I learn? Dynamo or Grasshopper? Rhino inside? Oh, now I gotta learn Rhino too. Like, or do I just do an in-place family, which everyone says is a bad idea, but I get the job done and I'm like tinkering away with most of the systems I already know how to use. I think what hopefully what people are trying to say, or my experience is like, People just want something really easy. And I think all our CAD technologies have not adapted. Like everything's still the 90s approach where you just have all your different buttons for every possible command that you could ever possibly do shoved in your face from the get-go. Most of them don't even work. Like you've got move or rotate it, and you can't even press those until you've already done a sequence of other commands. But they're all shoved in your face. So the user experience is still really inaccessible because you don't know what states you need to be in to then apply what commands to what, right? So and from I guess the challenge on the other side is like, well, re-architecting Revit's interface to be like highly contextual is a ton of work, and we've already have market share, and we've already sold it. And like last time, when they did the ribbon changeover back in 2010, when we went from the old school panels on the side, so many people complained because they don't like change, right? So even if you were to change it to a more contextual experience, you'd have massive backlash again. So it's like, why put ourselves through that when we can just leave it as it is? And there's enough of a network effect around Revit now too, where there's always someone else to bother in the office who knows a bit better than you. Than 10 years ago, there was one guy in Revit and trying to support everyone. Now everyone could sort of, there's that network effect. So, but yeah, I think there's definitely a generational gap compared to like Canva, Figma, and all these apps these days, which are much more contextually aware. They guide you through. There's a lot less buttons, and you sort of you're following work activities rather than just like I can possibly do anything at any time. So I think that's the change that needs to happen.
I see. And I know like we briefly had a discussion about like how gaming industry, even though they have complex systems, it's the onboarding and adoption is way higher, and you look forward to that experience. So I'm curious, like, why haven't anyone like designed a modeling software which has like gaming like experience or for interface?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I imagine like one that it's very precise, right? So years and years ago, when I first became a bid manager and I was rolling out Revit in a multidiscipline engineering company, and I brought on my first family creator, so he was helping me generate all the content. We were crunching our work, and I brought on another guy, and this was around the GFC period, and he was from the gaming industry, right? So I'm like, all right, cool. We're getting this guy, and he'd done AAA games. Like he worked on what's it called, Warhammer 40,000. So Brisbane used to have quite a thriving gaming community. Fruit Ninja's actually made here for people. I'm not really into the social games, but Fruit Ninja and stuff are actually built here in Brisbane. But there was a pretty heavy EA had studios here. All of this, anyway. At that time, GFC happened, so all the major studios were folding in Brisbane. So he'd come from like Warhammer and PlayStation games, and so he lasted 4 days. And so I came in, I'm like, oh, I need you to generate geometry and stuff like this. And he's like, yeah, cool, I can do that. And he's like one of those guys that has a mouse in one hand and a pen in the other. Crazy. Anyway, I'm like, well, we're building boxes and air conditioning terminals and this. He lasted 4 days. He's like, yeah, man, I can't do this work. He's like, it's really precise and it's terrible. And yeah, this is that. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's fair enough. But yeah, it was interesting, like from his point of view, because I started trying to get into him why, what really sucked about generating content. And he was like, yeah, like you got to be so precise with your things, where everything in gaming design is about making it look cool. It's about making it look interesting, but it doesn't have to represent any sort of real world constraint. It's only your artistic constraint. So I think there's this challenge where we put a lot of like really boring tech, like it's got to have this fire rating because my local code says it here in section 3.71, whatever. We have to put a lot of very boring constraints around a very creative industry, which I think gaming doesn't have that challenge, right? Like your constraints are like what your game engine can do or whatever. Whereas like we can't just like throw away fire ratings because we don't think it's very cool. So yeah, I think some of the parallels around that sort of stuff where you've got this uninhibited constraint, and I think Figma and those sort of things are that as well. Like you're uninhibited with those tools. You're limited by the capability of the tool, whereas we have all these limits that we need to work with and be constantly aware of as we design. And I think a lot of that's still missing from the current BIM tools to make it as easy as it could be. And then Figma. I think the other thing too that people overestimate, and I've seen like Clifton talk about this a lot recently. And I quite agree with him. This idea around 2D and 3D approaches for people, and you can see this with like Kanoa. You know, they've gone for a very 2D approach with their technology, and you know, people go, "Oh, why 2D is boring?" But the reality is 2D is very accessible, right? Like, why hasn't Google Maps turned to 3D forever ago? Because it's way more accessible as a 2D experience. And it's easy to see ahead. Like, you don't want to see what's right in front of you because I can see that with my eyes. I want to be like seeing a map of like the next 5 kilometers, is there traffic or whatever. But there's a whole level of mental, I think, training that you've got to do to even like pan, orbit, model, you know, zoom around in 3D. So while people might design in a 3D context, a lot of times they're still doing very two-dimensional. You're like in Revit, people go, "Oh, design in 3D all the time." It's like, well, not really. You create a floor sketch, which is a 2D sketch associated to a plane. It's a very two-dimensional exercise. Yeah, you might be in a perspective camera view to do it, but you're still essentially doing a 2D exercise, right? And I think there's a lot of value in that idea, and I think those mediums are still accessible. I don't think anyone's cracked a really nice way to get people into like navigating, absorbing views. Like I still think the best 3D experience that people have, like just general people in layman's who are not in the industry, is like Google Street. You drop your little guy, you zoom around, you double click when you want to move forward. And sure, you can't, you know, you don't have 50 hands on the keyboard. You have a mouse, right? Like, I think those are still the experiences that are easiest to grapple with. And they're not even a technical issue. That's like a mental learning. Like, I think people need to spend time learning how to orbit, zoom, pan. You know, gaming helps certain people to a degree get an awareness of these things. But even that's a different experience because you're on the ground. Usually it's FPS and scrolling around. So yeah, I think there's still this limit of layman's getting into, and you know, ordinary people getting into 3D because it is taxing. It is a different mental model to approach versus zoom and pinch, which Figma and all of those tools have cracked. And you know, the iPad made that accessible, where we do not have a similar zoom pinch type intuitive way to navigate 3D yet.
Mm-hmm. I see. I wanted to know your thoughts on like productivizing design services or workflow. So, like I was reading an article about like many times like we don't have opportunities of automating like some aspect of the design or workflow because every project has different requirement and like site constraints. And there's like one side of like people debating that you can productivize some aspect of the design and like replicate those. And so I wanted to know your thoughts, like can our industry work efficiently by a productivized workflow?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And there's so many examples. Like, you don't even have to like, you know, you can go to AU and see a whole bunch of examples. You can go to, you know, a number of YouTube websites, you know, the Parallax guys, shout out to Parallax. You know, they're a prime example, like John and those guys of like, they've like streamlined so many of the things with the tools that they built for themselves and then offer to the market. They've got a bunch of internal Dynamo stuff. It's a mental approach. A lot of the problems from what I see when we get involved in companies, especially when we're doing like computational design for companies, usually they're very time constrained because it's like people don't want to change the way they work unless it's either like really big. Like, it's amazing how many problems suddenly become computational problems just because of the scale of the problem. And so it's not about like people not wanting to change. It's really like, so we were involved. A concrete example, we got involved in a subway project a couple of years ago. So it was a couple of kilometers of a sunken tunnel, rail all through it. There was a couple of tunnels interfacing all this sort of thing. And they needed to run all the services, all the duct, electrical, et cetera, et cetera. And so they, you know, they heard of us, a company from around here, and they came and approached us and were like, "Can you do this? Because we've got like 3 weeks. We're going to do a couple of kilometers of modeling. We've got some CAD data. We've got this and that. And we've also got the side sections." And so we're able to, you know, like, okay, well, if we've got the alignment, we can take the 2D side section. That will determine where the ducts go relative to the center of the tunnel. So we created a script that interfaced with some Excel, interfaced with some 2D, and then started laying out all the ducts and electrical and stuff. Now that can be used for every tunnel you ever do again. And purely from that 2D, you can take that 2D snapshot, address the tunnel sizing, address the ballast locations, and then it'll roll out. And there's a lot of examples. Tunnels is one of those probably easier examples because, you know, everything that you do is within a circle. Like there's only so much you can do in there, and then the train's got to go in there too. So you know you can only fit so much. But that approach can be applied to anything. We did one not too a few years ago for a scaffolding company, where they again the problem was more like we do edge protection for houses and commercial. It takes us a few days to draw up all the scaffold in Revit. It's very long. You know, and we need to do this faster. So we just came up with a tool where you had these specialized detail components. You quickly wrap them around your house, and then I'll see if I can dig up the actual concrete example of this so you can see it in action. So it's not just me yapping. And then, you know, you run a script, and then it'll go through that script and determine, hey, oh yeah, and it'll automatically place the scaffold based on this position. If the terrain's changing, it'll deal with the terrain and all of that sort of stuff. And again, the return on that investment was we reduced their time from a couple of days down to like 3 or 4 hours every time you run those sort of scripts, right? So all of a sudden you're getting the benefit there. Here we go. I do have it. Let me swap this back and do a bit of a, see if this will play. Or do I need to present? Oh yeah, okay. It's playing. I gotta stop it, pause. All right, share screen. Sorry, I'm just shoveling things all over screens here. Yeah. All right, so hopefully you can see that okay?
Yep.
Let me know. Yeah.
Yep.
This will probably come across terrible from YouTube. But you know, if we play this, so you've got this little Dynamo player, you know, we've got these little edge protections that we've placed. So these are just little 2D detail components that you wrap around the edge of the building. You set your tile lengths and then the lengths to include. There we go. So from there, we run this, and then this will then go and place all the scaffolding to Australian standards around this building. So it'll automatically work out the different size of the bays and do best fit of the bays. It'll work out the ground relative. So you'll see all this pop up in a second. There we go. So you can see here, I'll just pause it. So you can see it's figured out that's an 800, that's a 12, that's an 1800. We've got some ties in between here too. So it's tried its best. You know, you can see it's automatically worked out to the larger sections and the smaller. It's placed all the cross bracing on the ends where it needed to be as well. So, and then the key to this is this, and a lot of this was taken from my learnings way back when I was doing scaffolding. So this is like a poorer version of the tool that I was using 20 years ago. Because funny enough, I had more. But then, you know, making sure the content's right. So if you wanted to show it in a wireframe, it's quite clear. So you can document this thing. It's not just about the model. It makes sure the families are all correct. So you get a good presentation here of the jacks, and you can see the jacks are following the terrain line here. But the bays will all remain consistent where you can walk on the landing platforms as well. And then if we go to the 3D view of this, there we go. So you can turn on the thicknesses. And then that's what sort of generates. So, and that's a whole bunch of just instances placed by Dynamo, right? So, and again, you can see it's done some clever stuff like, you know, it's placed the proper wood pallet supports on the grass, but it recognizes this is all slab. So you don't need to place those little pallets on the slab because that's not going to, you know, deform in the ground. All of that, and the bays have tried to align themselves as closely as possible to the levels and the roof line. So and a lot of this data is already in Revit, right? We're just milking this data straight out of Revit, so you can do this sort of thing. So, but again, building those user experiences, so it is quite easy to work with and things like that. But you know, a lot of things like this can be automated just by pulling them apart and thinking about them. And here's the same thing for that. I think this one's a bit early. Let's see if this one works. But this is that same process I was talking about with the subway lines. So there's an example of got topography, you've got a subway line. I'll speed it up because it's like 3 minutes long. Load the CAD file, load the DWG. So we've got this 2D section here. If we speed this up, we'll go through. I think this has gone and selected the CAD layer as well. So we've got CAD opened at the same time. And then if we come in and zoom into this, so you got the geometry is actually a bit slow from Revit cleaning up there. There we go. Oop, disappeared. Awesome. There you go. So you got like the ducts and all the components being placed. This is an early version. That's why they're not sitting together. You got the rail. And again, like just by using an alignment, from which needs to be developed from the civil guys as well on the 2D section. You can generate a phenomenal amount of it. And this comes back to this idea that Clifton was talking about 2D. Like people say they do 3D all the time, and this is an example of a 3D output, but the alignment was done 2-dimensionally. The cross sections are all done 2-dimensionally. It's really the amalgamation of these data sets to then generate the 3D information. So yeah. So yeah.
And I think like this might be a good transition to if you can show us some work of Bimbeats.
Oh yeah. So well, I guess we should get on to like the Bimbeats side of it. So Bimbeats started as a project. So what we'd done previously is we'd worked with companies a whole bunch where we'd done like journal file extractors or like, hey, I want to track when my Dynamo scripts are being run. And as you like a lot of companies say, you might put a little Dynamo node in there to track it or something like that. But we found that we did this like 3 or 4 times at that point for different companies. And we're like, okay, there's got to be an easier way to track all this. And then we were quite wide-eyed as well as like, oh, well, and the information, like people always say this stuff all the time. Oh, imagine if we tracked everything, all the amazing things we could do with all the data. And so we started working on that, a couple of years ago now. We probably took a while. There was the Bad Monkeys working on it. At the end of the day, Conrad and I went forward with the whole thing. The other guys were sort of keen to pursue other interests. So we got it to sort of market and started selling. So it's been on the market now 18 months. But yeah, the whole premise was like looking at your organizational workflow. So there's a lot to be found in sort of project workflows and analyzing specific project data. But we were more interested in like, okay, what is your organization doing? How are they doing it? You know, how do your teams work effectively? How's your Dynamo upskilling uptake? Like if you go do a Dynamo training class, how many people are using Dynamo after you do that class? All those sort of questions. And so that's when we came up with the idea around really setting this up and making it more as a product. And the hardest part is, and you see this all the time with people, is capturing the data, right? So you see sort of these developments fall over quite a bit is because you spend so much time coding and generating the data capture solution. And when you first do it, you think, well, that's the end of the job, right? We capture the data. But then there's this whole other data analysis part, which is like, how are we going to show this information? Is it pie chart, graph chart? How do we show the right amount of dashboards? So, and then configure to the right audience, like the technical BIM manager versus the project leader who's like interested in like hours over the week and drawings complete and things like that. 2 totally separate audiences. And so we were quite naive when we started building it in thinking, oh, well, we'll just build this thing. And then what will happen is we'll finish the tool and then everyone will buy it and build their own dashboards. And that turned out not to be the case. A lot of people aren't that familiar with even Power BI or any sort of business and, visualization package, let alone like data schemas and all of this sort of thing. And so that's when we've sort of spent the last 6 months, shifting our focus, not shifting our focus, but retargeting rather than building more and more like integrations, really focusing on like custom analysis and really easy feedback analysis from all that data we're capturing. So, and I guess the simplest premise to show you it working. Let me just fire up. Here's my dashboards. Here we are. I'll put this thing on the screen so you can. There we go. Do that. Share screen again. There we go. So the key things that we wanted to target was Bimbeats is very quiet, so you don't have people getting annoyed by. Hopefully, you can see that all good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You don't get annoyed by the system bothering you all the time. The other key thing that we want to make sure is everyone owns their own data. So we do not own or manage or store anyone's data. Everyone configures it a different way. So we've got people who use it on the cloud, people who set it up on Linux on a box in their office, people who set it up on Windows in their office, all of that sort of thing. So all we really look after is the data sets that allow you to send data from Revit or Grasshopper or whatever to Bimbeats. That's pretty much it. And we wanted it to be really accessible, even from a data point, so that your typical technical BIM manager could get his head around this type of technology. So, and so as I said, this is our database working on the cloud. This is the visualization front end for that database. And so all of this works in real time. So if I click on this, open up, you can see no data's come in for the last 15 minutes. If I refresh now, that's this project. So you can see here, you know, took me a few, and we can go through some of this data. So let's open this up and have a look. So there's me, there's my laptop. Don't hack me. There's the database I opened up. You know, there's the amount of objects that are in this particular Revit file, how long it took to open, all of this type of thing, view templates, number of walls, et cetera, et cetera. All the usual stuff, project height, rooms, is it a BIM 360 project? Yes or no? Where's it hosted? Warnings per file size. There's actually a calculated value that the users do in the database. So the cool thing about, we use a database type called Elastic. It allows you to do these additional calculations on top. And then, so you don't have to build those into the core algorithm. So people can go and, you know, times total object count by size of the file and all these other metrics that they're interested in. And then same with things like warnings or basic file information. So, you know, this file's been saved 20 times, et cetera, et cetera. So you get warning counts and those type of things as well. And then but that's just obviously data from the Revit model. So as I change views, so as I go to level 1 or level 2, I'm going to start getting information about those levels as well. So I can see I just opened up a view. Again, it doesn't look too obvious here, but I'll just expand this. So, okay, I opened up a view. There was some warnings generated as well. We can scope down into these warnings. And this is what we're actually looking at here. So room and separation lines overlap. It's affecting elements. And what we're looking at here is this is like looking at the data the way you would look at an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. Like it's really accessible. It's got very simple search queries. So if I just want to find all the open records, or every time I've opened a Revit model, it'll pull up that for today in the last 15 minutes. But if I want to look at that over, say, I don't know, last 6 months, there we go, refresh. There we go. So run that hit. It's going to take a while because it's tracing back through 6 months of data across our team. So there you go. So we've opened 2,753 Revit models in the last 6 months. And again, you can see the durations over that. You know, you can start zooming in. Oh, why were we opening so many Revit models that week? Most likely it's because we were running some sort of Revit API and we were trying to build in. So you can start to quickly zoom in, and that's going to update these values here. So you can see August 17th. And I could go through and find out, okay, Mike was working on a model, there's a rather large model, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this data is quite searchable at your fingertips. And then the next power of this is obviously, that's at the Revit event level, but you can get down to the user level as well, which is essentially the journal file data. So scraping the journal file. So if we look in the last 15 minutes, it's probably not much yet because I haven't actually started doing anything. Well, let me start drawing some walls here. Oh, here we go. Through some walls and oops. Keep making loud beeping noises. Yeah, place the door, things like this. So if we refresh that now, oh, that should be working. Oh, I've still got open in the filter. My bad. It was trying to look for open Revit files when I was clearly not looking for open Revit files. So we grab the action name now. You can start to see I was creating a wall. I created an object, so I did a control copy, all of that type of thing. If I stretch this and if I was to go up here and place another door manually, there we go, refresh that. I should have door come up. There we go, create a door. That's me hitting the escape button 3 or 4 times in a row, as I typically currently do. So yeah, you get all of this sort of data as well. And then where you want to go with this data is up to you, right? So from here, you can do a couple of things. One is you can start to put it together in visualization. So things like we were talking about earlier. So the cool thing about the Elastic database is you can literally pipe the information anywhere. So what I mean by that is you can push this across to Power BI because it's got a full open API that comes with it. So this is just the same sort of data out of just, you know, using Power BI as an interface. You can use Excel as the interface if you want to pull data down and mess with it. So you get these breakdown of projects and health statuses. And again, the key thing is all of this data is gathered silently, right? Like users just work and you're getting all this information to then look at best practices, number of tools. So what tools are you using across your business? How many unrecoverable errors you're getting a day, a month, again, depending how far you're looking back, fatal errors, uptime, downtime, all of this type of thing, right? And that's just for Revit. And then if you were to take the same thing for, say, Dynamo, so because it's gathering this across Dynamo and Grasshopper, it's the same thing. Like what packages of, what custom packages does your organization have in there? How many times are they being used? How many Dynamo runs have been successful and versus how many haven't been. So I'm just looking at a user here. If I was to expand it to other users, over the last 8 weeks, you get this sort of breakdown. Which scripts are most available? What's your failure rate on those scripts? All of that sort of thing. Which projects are using Dynamo the most? So there's a lot of training opportunities to further go back through and go, hey, I'm using this project for this. Deleted nodes. Which nodes are getting deleted from your scripts all the time? Who are your most active Dynamo users across your business? Which scripts are stable? So that breakdown of scripts that are stable versus not stable. So again, this comes back to that creating good Dynamo experiences for your users. Do you know how often Dynamo is crashing on the scripts that you've written? Why is it crashing on those scripts, right? You might not be able to answer why, but also like how long are these scripts taking to run, right? So this update sheet named uppercase taking 829 seconds. Why is it taking that long? Is it because they're running it on really, really big files? And maybe that's the answer, which, okay, there's not much I can do about that. But if you don't know, you don't know, right? Like dimension plate, so it's some sort of dimensioning script. So this is just that breakdown that you can start pulling from users. What's this one? I don't know what this one is. There we go. Core package usage. So again, that breakdown of core packages and then other add-ons. So if you're using things like Nonica, we can automatically pipe like, okay, we've got Nonica, we've got any other third-party tools that are using either Dynamo or not. What scripts are we running from those tools as well? So, and you can do this across Navis, IFC, et cetera, et cetera. So, but at the same time, you can still have all of those widgets built into your dashboards here in Bimbeats as well. So if you don't want to go and connect Power BI and all of those sort of things, you can have a full set of dashboards here. So we've already built hundreds out of the box that we use. So these ones that are tagged Power BI means that there's an equivalent dashboard in Power BI. So we can look at like computational performance of Grasshopper. We look at like BIM overview. So we have a look at some of these. So this is Grasshopper usage in the last 30 days, what scripts are being used, what packages, who's running those. And again, you could interrogate like, oh, there's high usage here. Let's break down and just look at what was happening at this particular point. And you get that breakdown. Whoop, that's a little bit too far of a breakdown, but yeah. And then same with like BIM overview. So we've got this ability to have like, where are all my projects globally around the world? So there we go. This thing to load up. Oh, my little points aren't coming through. Probably a bug in this one. So normally you get a breakdown if you've actually set the geolocations of the Revit projects where they are, projects by warning count, average warnings, opening times. So this is quite a heavy dashboard. These ones we try and steer clear of because it bombards you with quite a lot of information. But again, it's all available and down to things like, are you interested in, is your disk space running out on your drive? All of that sort of stuff as well. So it's quite extensive what you can get out of it because it ties into most of your apps. I don't have any metric feed. Let's try IT. Let's see what comes up from that. Oh, yeah, cool. We've got an IT systems on here. There we go. So these are more targeting like RAM usage and CPU if you're interested in like capturing that sort of information instead. I think this needs okay, I don't know who that user is. So let's remove that from the filters. There we go. Something like this, so you can start seeing CPU loading times, average memory usage. So it's quite easy to tell, if your system's constantly bottoming out. And this is looking across your whole organization. I haven't filtered to a specific user, which is why that's looking like that. I'll just pull that down. There we go. So similar sort of thing, you know, whose hard drives are being extensively used, average CPU use, and a bit of an easier breakdown. So if we were to target me, for instance, there we go. We should get a little bit better data. Oh, maybe not. I probably don't have that configured properly. That's all right. But you can get a number of processes, et cetera, et cetera. So, but yeah, the idea is to lead this. Obviously, model health checking is one thing. You can start to take this down, as you've seen, a number of different ways to understand how your organization's using these things, what files are crashing. When you start doing training on Revit walls on a particular thing, are the users that you've trained go back and are they implementing these things? Why or why not? If you've got a set of packages that you're using in your firm that you've developed, you know, how are they being adopted? Are they being adopted on all projects? If not, why? But if you don't have those questions, it gets a lot harder. And we've got other customers who are doing more fancy things with this, like trying to be more predictive. There are things that track more around like job management and how many hours are we spending in Revit? So we've got a couple of firms who are very interested in well-being. So are you working in Revit after 7 p.m. at night? Why? Are you constantly doing that? Why? We're really interested. Are you okay? So there are those things as well where you can check against, like, yes, they put in 40 hours in the timesheet because the manager said don't spend more than 40 hours. But the significant impact on those people and watching for things like burnout become important to different firms, and that's probably the key part about this, because we went down the road of making it so customizable. You can really do whatever you want with your data. We don't manage or look after any of that. It's really down to how you as an organization want to provide a better experience to your team and understand where your team's at as well.
I see. I think like this is a great product demo. I loved it. I feel like this is the first data intensive like feedback, which is quite useful for like analysis and like improving the workflows and finding areas of improvement in a firm.
Yeah, so it is quite cool. And there are other things too. Like we've got some, let me go find. So we've got some quite cool things too. This is a bit older. But there are things that you can do that above that, right? So these are the things that we'd like to get to. We're not there yet. And it's mostly because of the maturity. And we talked about this before we started. The problem that people don't understand or just starting to get into is, even if you install this today, right, you still need to capture the data. Like you're not going to get the last 2 years or 1 year of behavior. You might get a last couple of weeks if you've got those journal files and stuff like that. But you need to be running this. If you want to understand how different projects compare, it has to be run across the life of those projects. And then you've got that forever, right? But that ability to turn on the tap for data capture is, I think that's the real prohibitor that a lot of firms found. And that's why we built it, is this challenge of like, turning on the tap is the hard part. Like this ability to capture data in a very easy way. Like I've seen a lot of presentations, and you've probably seen them too, where people go, "Oh, we capture Dynamo. First we run something that's capturing a CSV, and then I go and grab all those CSVs and put them in an Excel, and then from that Excel I can load that into Power BI, and you get a snapshot of information, right? You definitely get a snapshot. But then to do that again, someone has to go and do that process constantly, and then you're managing all these Excels of all these snapshots. And, whereas obviously the data capture is probably the hardest part because it's the most IT centric part of the process, right? Like, and that's why we developed the proper add-on for it. So that you don't have to worry, it just does it. You're more interested in looking at the results. And like, here's, the more advanced type things where you can break it down by, we'll try this. So this is starting where we started to look at, and this was a research project we did a couple of years ago, where we're looking at skill sets by users, right? So, and again, this is using the same front-end visual programming system, right? So if you're interested in like, okay, which users are specialists of which parts of Dynamo, that's what this is looking at, right? So I can come down to Havard. I can see Havard here, and he's like, wow, okay, he uses the geometry system quite a lot. And these are some of the nodes, but I know Jasper uses like the cone by coordinate system quite a lot. And Conrad's quite familiar, obviously, with the Archilab product, which you'd expect as he wrote the Archilab product, and Bumblebee, and then you can see this interaction between like Yelston and Conrad with the Revit API and what. So then you can start building, and this is an automated network map, right? Like all I've done is go show me the users and how they use Dynamo based on their packages. And you can start to get these sort of breakdowns over different time periods, and you can do the same thing with projects. So here's a similar thing, like, okay, here's the technical school, and these are the Dynamo scripts and projects. And again, we have a lot of projects for project name because you just open it and then we do something and close it down. But again, you start to see like which projects are being used with which node packages, and you can do this against skill sets too. So if you want to start going, okay, who's a guy who's rendering stuff all the time in our firm, you can actually see, or who's the guy that's doing certain Revit stuff or CAD stuff or who's the guy who knows this Grasshopper package the most. They're the type of things you can start to gravitate towards, and ask those questions of the data and really see that, because a lot of the times firms, you know, and I'm seeing this more and more with computational committees, because a lot of the people that we deal with who do this stuff, you know, or full-time or almost full-time, and this isn't, I'm trying not to generalize, but there's a lot of introverts who do this type of work, right? They're not the guys who are posting on their intranets going, hey, check out my cool stuff or this or that. They're just getting their work done. And so then, you know, you see firms as a reaction to that go, okay, well, we're going to create committees, which this isn't a bad thing as well. It's a natural way to do it. We're going to create committees that run around trying to find these people and trying to expose them to the group and identify them for other opportunities. And that's fine, but you that's a very, I guess, human way of doing it. You have to grab that introvert, sit him down and go, okay, what makes you good at Grasshopper? That's a very horrible question to ask an introverted person, right? Like, yeah, you want to be able to go like, oh, boom, I can see this. Oh, cool. I can, oh, cool. I really need help with geometry. Oh, okay, cool. I know I can ask Avad and I know I can ask Jasper. They seem to be the guys that know what they're doing. I go onto Teams and I ping them. Or I'm looking for help on rendering in Revit or Inkscape. Who's our guy that uses it all the time? And so you can use this data to query for those skill sets as well. And this is like, just straight up, like, you know who's been using those tools the most, because it's just recorded. So it opens up a totally different way of these capability sort of solutions that people go, where it's like, oh yeah, we've got a capability thing. Please go and fill out your skills in this thing. And again, some people like to overboast on their skills and, oh, I'm great at everything. And then you bring them in and it ends up being a bad thing. And some people like to not really, or be modest, or not really recognize their true value, where they are incredibly talented at these things, but they don't want to promote that. And this removes all of that bias because it's just facts.
I see. I can like think of a lot of use cases of like all the data visualizations. So I have a question, like, what are the steps to get it installed, and what's your business model?
So business models are on the website. So it's basically I would say typically this isn't really for smaller firms. And by smaller firms, I mean, like, we started a 50-seat license starting point. So you should have, I think the smallest group that we do have in the system at the moment is about 35 Revit users, but we started it at 50. It's just a lot of work for a firm with like 5 or 6 Revit people. And usually in a firm like that, everyone's so busy and you're also close to each other that a lot of this stuff doesn't apply. Like, if you're in a firm with 4 other Revit guys, you know who your rendering guy is. You know who you might not even have a Grasshopper guy, right? You know who the guy who can sort of play with Dynamo is. Like, this sort of system isn't for those. But as soon as you're out, we find our typical size firms sitting somewhere around the 100 to 200, and our biggest firms are well over thousands of users. Installation, there's a setup. If you go with the cloud deployment, which is what we recommend, it's the easiest way to get up and running. You simply set up the cloud database, where you then get the installer for all the clients. However you push out clients, whether it's what's it called, SCM, SCCM, the deployment that way, or if you use Citrix, we support full Citrix. You just install it there, and then it'll just start working straight out of the gate. So typically, you can have the whole system up and running. We generally will support the IT person if you do use the recommended cloud service within about 45 minutes. And then however long it takes to roll out a new installed client to a user, as per any other installation app, how long it takes to do that. And you can choose to scale that or not, depending on how you want to put it on machine. So getting up the system is about 45 minutes, rolling it out to everyone's however long it takes your company to roll out a new add-on or a Revit upgrade to everyone. And that's it. Then the data will just start flowing. And then it's just about the size of your organization is how big of a database you need. Obviously, if you've got 100 to 150 people, the database running costs are quite small. Maybe 150 to 200 a month for the cloud version. If you're a couple of thousand people, then you are talking like, $1,000 or plus a month or more, depending on that stuff. But yeah, it has been designed to be a very, very easy experience. If your IT guy is rather savvy, he can install it without our help. Generally, we're just there to help, like check a few things. We've got help desk for all of that. So yeah, so that's it. But yeah, typically we find companies will be up and running inside a few days. And then, yeah.
I see. And like a few questions I have on the software development side is,
yeah.
Are you like sending like data packets to cloud server every event trigger? And like it looks like from the first impression, like you're like noting every event. So how big are the files ultimately on the cloud?
The cloud, well, the data packets are tiny, right? So like you saw before, like if we have a look at a data packet, we can see it here. I'll just close down some of these dashboards and let me find that discover. Here it is. All right, so let's go. So this is like a data packet from a journal file. Now it's important to note with journal files, we're not interrupting the Revit interface in any way because we're reading the journal file directly. So we're not even on the thread of the Revit side, because usually the two main questions we get is like, yeah, is it sending a lot of data? And you're talking something like this. This is, I don't know how many kilobytes this is, but this is very, very small. So a lot of it is very small packets. So your system is sending packets, if you want the journal system, it's sending all of those. If it's the Revit events and things like that, it's mostly during like saves and syncs and things of that nature if we were to look at the events. So it's a lot less events. So you can see here, I've sent 21 hits to the journal file. I haven't been doing very much. But if we have a look at like the Revit event, and I haven't even done anything in the last 15 minutes, you can see it's not sending anything until I go and open a new project or something like that. And so the other thing that people usually ask us is like, oh, how much does this get in the way of Revit, right? Like if I'm already using I don't know, like how much is this going to add if I open a really large model or a different size model or something? Is this going to be adding? So there you go. So that's the speed of it going to the cloud and reporting those values back, right? So we've got 5 hits. This is probably the biggest one, but again, we're talking kilobytes. Like it's very tiny packets. And then if you are interested in knowing like, oh, how long did this take? We've tried to be very, very transparent, and part of that is so we can diagnose our own issues too, right? So if we go and have a look at our Revit look here, there we go. So we have a look. Let's just turn on action name so we can see. There we go. So all of these little BBs, this is how long that our system has taken to actually calculate those variables. So this is how much overhead. Now it's important to note, not all of these happen on the Revit thread. So we've been quite diligent in moving the bigger stuff off the other threads. So you can see here, like a lot of these, like basic data, 0.004 of a second, 0.003. This one's the biggest one. So BB instance and types, that's 1.4. So that's calculating the count of the instance and type. That actually happens all off thread. So even though it's here, it's not actually interrupting the Revit overflow. And then we can see like document time and small file collections with nothing, and then total open time. So even though it says total open time was that was the total open time for Bimbeats, but then here was the total open document time as well. And you'll notice sometimes this number will be bigger than that. How is that possible? And it's because a lot of these are being calculated off thread as well. But we still want to know, like we've seen projects where someone's going, oh wow, this file's taking a really long time to open. Like, okay, why is that? And they had like 300,000 or 400,000 like lines, like model lines in their project. And counts that big in Revit just take a really long time for the API to process. There's no other way around it. So we were more bringing up like 300,000 model lines is an obscene amount of model lines in your project. What are you guys doing in that job? That seems really weird. And so they were able to go away and have a look at those sort of things. So usually, it does scale. We've definitely found, and events work funny from a really deep implementation point for people who might be caring or not caring. Once you get over, and we're not sure of the exact number yet, but it's somewhere around 1.2, maybe 1.3 million objects in Revit, and your file size around 1.4, 1.5 gig for a Revit model. The way events work switches, and this is external events for people who are interested in the deep Revit API point of view. So normally external events are quite reactive, where an external event is where basically you put things on another thread, and Revit waits until it's not busy, and it moves that workload to the other thread, grabs it, and brings it back. So it runs the calculation, but it waits for the pauses in Revit to do those things. But once you get to that file size, it actually no longer works properly. It's not waiting for the events properly. I don't know whether it's an optimization thing or whatever, but essentially, normally what it would do is process as many external events as possible, and that drops significantly, and it processes very few. It takes a lot longer, even on very small counts or small workload processes. So we have found from an API point of view, there's this switch that Revit has around these really big files when clients have, because some clients got 1.8 gigabyte files and stuff, where it totally switches, and Revit events, external events, don't work as they normally do in a standard file. So we haven't encountered the best solution. We're brute forcing in some, and we put a delimiter on those really big files, because our main goal is not to interrupt the user experience in any way. But that stuff definitely happens as well on those bigger files. But we try to be quite open, so clients are well aware of, like, hey, this is how long it took to open the Revit model. This is how long it took to do these things. So we try to be very transparent with how our algorithms work. So
I see. And
yeah.
so if I
even down to debugs, I haven't had any crashes in the last 15 minutes, but you can actually see if a client's ever interested, you can come down to, like, let's just say 1 month ago. There we go. But there's all the times our system has fallen over. What's important to note is when it does fall over, it's quite elegant in terms of it'll never crash Revit. This is actually a failure to send an event. This happens quite a lot when, if you don't have internet connection, this type of error is like, hey, I tried to send this data to the database, but I couldn't send it. So it's not really a failure event. It's just more like, hey, you're obviously not connected to the net. I'm just going to log it. And then eventually it got to the net and was able to put it up. So yeah, you can see those sort of errors. And yeah, so even with errors, to be clear, we don't yet centralize any error messages. If clients are experiencing it, we ask them, but then they've got a list of all the errors they've ever had, so they can report back to us as well if they encounter anything funny that they're interested in us looking at.
Got it. And so if I understand it rightly, so the Revit API is sending data from, like, the application to Elastic database, and then you are reading in the browser when it gets updated. And
yeah. So it'll go straight to the database, and then this is Kibana, which is the visualization sort of database for it. And then the system is quite fast, as you've seen. So like the same with Dynamo, right? So let's do a last 15 minutes here with Dynamo or something. Last 15 minutes. Unless someone else is working. Conrad's usually in bed by this time because it's getting late in the States. But if we fire up Dynamo here, so even the Dynamo add-on is a view extension add-on. So you don't need a node or anything like that. So if I fire up something like this, the basic system, we wire that up and we hit run. There we go, and we hit that there. Oh wait, I've still got the filter on. My bad. There we go. So you can see, I opened the file, I did the connection addition, I started it, it completed successfully, and again we can break down this into this, like, what version of Dynamo are you using? Were there any errors in this file? Run completed true. How long did the run take? 0.172 of a second. What time did you start this run? Because some runs never finish, right? Or some runs bomb out. And then when you open the script, you get a breakdown, how many nodes are in the package? Do you have any nodes? Are they groups? So automatically you can start doing things too. If you're interested, like across your firm, how many people are placing nodes? Are they placing groups? Are they freezing nodes? You get this sort of breakdown of, like, are people following any sort of standards you might have as well. And this tracks the difference between Dynamo Player and Dynamo as well. So are you running things from Dynamo Player? Are you running things from Dynamo? if you use sandbox mode, that's also captured as well. So, and if you want to know things like, oh, which connector did I add? I can see like, oh, okay, I added the plus connector, and I added X to Y, and added that connection point too. And if I add new nodes, you can start seeing what nodes have been added and what nodes have been deleted, all that sort of thing as well. So you can see which scripts are being edited, and then down to that level. Grasshopper is quite interesting because Grasshopper can compute so much faster, and it's always computing, that this obviously fills up by a lot, right? Like you have a lot of start and ends because Grasshopper is like constantly recalculating purely because it can, because the underlying engine's a lot faster than the Dynamo engine, because the Revit limitations and some other things. So this you have to actually approach your Grasshopper analysis in a very different way, because Revit almost always, pretty much everyone will always say, do not ever turn on the automatic mode because dangerous things will happen, blah blah blah. So don't ever turn this on. You never want this on, right? Like, whereas in Grasshopper, like you always want that on, right? It's very rare that you just want to run. Occasionally, there are bigger scripts, of course, that do it, but your average out of the box guy is just running things constantly. So as a result, you'll have, like, if you look at just straight up comparisons of like how many times was a script run, a Grasshopper script might get run a couple hundred times in half an hour, whereas a Dynamo script might get run like 10 or 5 or something like that. So you've got to definitely start thinking about how you apply like usage statistics very differently. Even though the two products seem the same, they definitely perform very different. So if you're interested in this computational type analysis versus say CAD or Revit, they're the things to think about if you're interested in Grasshopper Dynamo comparisons in your firm. So.
Yeah, and I even saw like you had like some Bluebeam
Yep.
data as well. So
yeah, so Bluebeam, I don't know if we've got any data here. Probably not, because we mostly use that in the dev database. So I don't have anything here. We built this for a client who was just interested in understanding the Bluebeam stuff. So for Bluebeam, as you know, Bluebeam doesn't really have an API. It's got a bit of a REST API for their studio system, but it has a log file. So all we're doing is we mine the log file for like, oh, I open this and then I perform these markups and stuff. So again, you get an idea of like who's marking up what, how many people are using Bluebeam, all of that sort of thing. And it's the same with like, because we generically capture information. Like if you're interested in, and a couple of firms have used this. I don't know if I've got it in here. Let's see if I find the licensing license. No, not in that one. Let's go back to the old school production one. So each of these is what's called a space, and a space is basically your little playground to do whatever you want with the analytics without interfering with the business version. So you can have production versions, test versions, my version, your version, all of that sort of thing. So you can create your own dashboards quite easy without interfering with other people's other dashboards, or maybe the company one if you've got a company one. Okay, there's nothing in there. I was hoping I had a software one, but basically we've got software broken down where it's like by Microsoft products, by Adobe products, by Autodesk products. So you can start to see like who's using what products. Let's see if it's, it might be in dev. We usually put everything in dev. That's just our combined collaborative playground. But you can start to understand like how many people are using the same product at the same time, right? So the example was we had a company using a lot of Adobe stuff, and now it's annoying because I can't seem to find it. Try license again in there. Dynamo users, PC uptime. Sorry, but yeah, they wanted to see like, okay, concurrently they had like 150 Adobe licenses, but concurrently they're only ever using like 20 at a time, right? So then they started to break down. I could probably just create it. Maybe that'll be easier. I'll just create an example of that. That might be easier. So you can see the creation of visualization. So we go, oh, let's just check here. It might be in the business. So each dashboard is then broken down into these business. Yeah, there we go. Software product usage histogram. So let's open that one up. Let's have a look at this thing. All right. So this is a terrible histogram. I didn't put this one, but you can start to see like C# and all my different processes over the last 15 minutes. But what I'll actually do is I'll do a proper viz so we can break it down by software. Let's see if I can get this right. Let's do a lens. A lens is a type of viz. It's quite cool because it allows you to sort of pick the data that you want first, and then you can start to assemble your visualization. The schema is something people have to learn. My data should already be being recorded. So let's look at events. No, we actually want to look at process by name. Process by name. There we go. Cool. So what do we got here? And then I might put a filter in here. So let's go with process name is one of, or let's just put is revit.exe. Great. There we go. So I'm using Revit at the moment. You can see that there's a count. Probably a stack chart's probably not the one I want to use. And then we might want to break this down by Revit by then, let's say user. So I want to break it down by user, do my breakdown. So at the moment, it's just me because it's in the last 15 minutes. It's not very exciting. We probably want to pull the vertical value down to there. And then we want to use a date histogram to track it by time. And again, learning visual. So here we're looking at, like, I was using it here, and then I think at the moment we've got to set up to capture the data. Every 10 minutes it'll provide a usage. But let's start rolling this over the last 90 days, right? There we go. It's looking a little bit ugly. So let's do timestamps, right? Customize the time interval. Let's do this by, say, 7 days. How's that looking? That's not good. There's only like 3 of us in there. Process name Revit. Yeah, that's fine. So we're only ever using it consistently. It looks like we're only using concurrently one session each, which wouldn't surprise me in the last 90 days. But then if you were to have, let's add another process. I think it's process name. Let's check. Let's edit this filter and go as one of. So we want Revit XE. Enter. I think it's ACAD XE is the right how to do AutoCAD. Save. There we go. So now we start getting this breakdown of like AutoCAD and Revit. And I know the graph's a little bit ugly, but it's because we don't capture a huge amount of data in ours. But you can try different visualizations as well. So you can start to get an understanding of whose laptop is running which system. And then you do get much nicer graphs. This one's actually quite ugly. I'm not very happy with this one. Let's try a stack diagram. And this is what's quite nice about it, is you can see when people are all working together and that sort of thing. So I wish I had my other one that I built previously. So, because it quite clearly has like a corner with Microsoft and all of that. But again, this is this idea where if you've got 50 seats or 100 seats or something, is your whole team making use of those seats? Or at most, are they only ever concurrently using 5 seats? So yeah, here's an example. Like Clock is using 2 instances, whereas the rest of us are only using 1 instance. So if you amalgamate all those instances to total number of users, maybe instead of top values, I should do this by sum or something like that. I'll leave it for now. But yeah, now you can know like, oh, we only ever use 30 licenses at the same time of this product. Does it make sense to scale down? Or are people trying to constantly use the product more and more? So we should scale up. And again, you can prove all of this value because you've got the data back to your stakeholders and people like that. So
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just like pleasantly surprised by the ease of data visualization and the options the interface provides. There are like a lot of things one could experiment and explore.
Yeah, it used to be quite horrible. And then Elastic have been awesome. Like they punch out too many new versions. Like you get a version of like Kibana and Elastic like every month or something like that. It's crazy how often they do it. And so then it's a matter of like trying to be careful of which ones we actually do, pick up and which ones we don't pick up. But there's a lot, and like you can see, like there is a machine learning. We haven't played with that. Actually, one of our customers is, because they're trying to predict certain values and stuff in their projects. But you can just turn on like anomaly detection for like crashes and stuff like that and start building those frameworks. We did some stuff early on, but we really were like, well, we really found the customers were still in the space of like, okay, I've got all this data. Now what do I do with it? because like you can see our data is not very much, but when you're looking at a firm of like a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand people, like they're ingesting like half a billion records every week. And so you've got to think about visualize, like people are still in the point of like, well, I've assembled a huge Dynamo things around Excel, and I've got, 20,000 or 30,000 records or something like that. And how do I deal with that? Or, some people have 100,000 or something. But when it's a different type of analysis when it's like, well, we need to filter down through 400 million and start and analyzing that live and in real time as well. And there's so many different data points you can cross correlate with. So it's just a different type of challenge of how you get that into something. And I kind of feel like the Kibana place, what we found is this is really like a technical platform. And then what we found is users for the management kind of want this sort of very simple sort of built baked experience where it's quite obvious management can glance at it and be comfortable. Whereas while the power is definitely here in terms of like working on the fly and a bit more data analysis kind of point of view, it's not the optimal space where people feel confident in. So like just there, like I just brought up 500,000 records in a few seconds. So this is the power of, and if I wanted to go, okay, how many of those are Revit? This really comes into that querying part where I can click in here and you get your IntelliSense if you're interested. But I just wanted to know that's just going to filter those records and return to me like, okay, how often is Revit happening? So, and again, I get that breakdown of like usage really quickly. Or I could do the same thing with ACAD and stuff. So it's got this really nice discoverable system of being able to find information quickly. And we actually get into this. It not just tells you when you're using Revit, but it also tells you like how much memory was Revit using, how much CPU at that point in time was Revit using, normalized, and this sort of breakdown too. So if you are interested in like, okay, whose machines are constantly like packing it because they're constantly doing this really heavy stuff, and should we be looking at better machines for them versus this like, let's just have this machine for everybody. Do you use this data to assign the right machines and make more educated procurement decisions to buy the right machine for the right person based on what they're doing? And that's a harder thing to say. That's an easy edge case to do. But this sort of affords you like, is the hardware that you're buying the right hardware in the first place? All of those sort of things.
I see. And like, this is an incredible tool. So how much time you guys took to develop the whole software?
It's a hard one to pick. So we hit proof of concept. We probably hit let's see. I think we started working on it properly. Like we'd built 3 or 4, like I said, iterations for people way back in the day. So we had some lessons learned and we had some approaches. We had some code snippets. I would say development started sometime early that year. Was that 2018? I think it was 2018. And then we took it to Europe with Edinburgh. Was sort of the first time we've shown a couple of people. That was still really early. I think the first time I ran the Revit extractor on a big file, like a 500 meg file, to extract the data from that file, it was taking like 280 seconds. So like this user was like, I'm like waiting and I'm like, holy crap, this isn't gonna fly. Because it was just my tool like trying to iterate. So then I spent the next 6 months like we worked really, really hard on getting that down to like sub 3 or 4 seconds. So we, that was the first version. Version 1 was 280 seconds on a 500 to 600 meg file, I think was my benchmark test file. So yeah, spent the next 6 months getting that down. Then I spent December quite a lot. I did a mad crunch. It was a pretty bad Christmas because I pretty much used my holidays to just do like 18-hour a day coding marathon sessions because we'd sort of committed to a customer and we had an early version they were playing with, but they're like, we'll buy this, but it has to be ready like January the 15th. And I'm like, all right. So yeah, it was just one of those slogs, unfortunately. It was definitely bad, very bad work-life balance. It was one of those things where I would like get up at, 5 or 6 in the morning and I'd be there till like 11. And then I'd go to sleep and rinse and repeat. Like, I think I took Christmas Day off. I think I took New Year's off, sort of. But that whole like 3 weeks was just me crunching like crazy. But we made the January 15th. We had a version that the guys could use. And then I would say over the next 12 months is when we got to feature parity. So we wanted to do, I don't think at the time we had Rhino. We basically had Revit and Dynamo in first release, but we told everyone like, we will get these other features. So we spent the next 12 months building out Rhino. Conrad did a lot of that work because Conrad's really familiar with that. We did a lot of work, obviously, on the licensing module, on the deployment, making sure the system works really easy with the database, bringing the times down even further, so further optimization, then expanding out to all the other features. So I think we achieved feature parity, IFC, and all of those. I think we got feature parity around March this year. So it probably took about 18 months to achieve the promises that we've given to everyone. With at least four developers, all in various stints. So some people working full time, some people working part time. Now me and Conrad do the bulk of the development and adding new things. But and Matt joined us in March, and he's been heavily focused on like our Power BI experience. So all of this has been like Matt building all the REST API integrations. Building all of that stuff out has been all Matt's work and things like that. So updates we're doing at the moment is we're doing some enhancements for the BIM 360 integration. So you can connect into your BIM 360 as well and see all the projects you've got on that. And then, yeah, so this one has really been getting these Power BIs out because we realized even though we built all the data capture, clients are still in this like, how do we build dashboards? How do we make user experiences for people and all of this? So, and a lot of people aren't having dedicated data analysts. Like some businesses and architecture firms do, but they very much focus on the financial side of this. Like, how do we make more profitable products and how do we do this? So I still think there's this gap where people are still looking at, which is fine, you know, the value of the business in the business analytics of finance versus projects and money and things like that. And we did some early works for a company actually where we did a business analyst project where we were just looking at like, what is more profitable? A project where you get paid up front or a project where you have to fight for your money? And it's funny, the projects where you have to fight for your money, we looked at 4 years of data from this company out of their system. And the projects where you have to fight for your money are more profitable for this business overall. And the reasons being, basically our determinations were one, because we went through the data and the data showed that overall, yep, you earn more money. But interviewing the project managers and stuff, and there was definitely some specifics in that. But a lot of the times they were just so reluctant to spend any money. Versus like when you start getting these payments up front, you're like, yeah, sweet, let's try this, let's try that, let's try this. And it's a horrible thing, right? Because that's automatically like, oh, okay, well, let's like never spend any money on anything. And you're automatically like stifling innovation. So obviously there's innovations about spending money, so you can make a decision on that. But ultimately, as much as people say it's a pain to get money out of certain clients, oh, they're always late, always having to justify, they're the projects that, funny enough, and this definitely isn't for all cases, just as a general overall in this particular business case, they were the ones that they ended up with a better margin from a business point of view. So it is interesting, some of those things when you look at those challenges, but that's the sort of stuff that business analysts are interested in doing, right? Whereas this is that next step down, whereas this is a combination of like, what is a, you know, IT are interested in this, you know, BIM managers are interested in this, and then project managers are interested in this data. And then ultimately, you know, what does this look like for a CEO or these leaders in the firm? Like, and a lot of those just want a happy smiley face thing. Like, how many of my projects are happy? How many of my projects are neutral? And how many are sad? And then what does it look like to drill down in that? And how do you amalgamate those metrics? And that's where it becomes biased, because different companies put different weightings on what's important. You know, is it earned value management, as in normally we do 200 sheets on this project. We want to know how many sheets have hit this revision. Therefore, that's a bias metric. Others are interested in time spent per view. They're interested in time spent overall on the project. Versus like the deadline deliverables, and so comparing those metrics. So that's where it gets a little bit harder, because it's hard to make an out of the box thing at that level. You sort of generally work with customers and do consulting sort of engagements where we work with them to help them do those sort of things and give them clearance on which approach is based on the importance they set on which matrix.
I see. And like, is it bootstrapped or you got some investment?
Nope. We got investment from ourselves. No, we are 100% bootstrapped. We've never taken money from anyone. We've never loaned. definitely me and Conrad just made decisions with our own, because we've still got Automation and Archilab and Bad Monkeys as a consulting businesses. So basically, we just made decisions to tip our own time, because essentially it's time. We didn't have to pay ourselves so much. We were all getting paid. So it's just balancing that work, and a lot of it just came out of sweat hours at night in the morning. So, and it still does for some of it. We definitely, it's definitely selling and things, but yeah, we're not tied. The restrictions, I think, there's definitely massive value in VC funding, and there's the right engagements. We realized that we could build this without an extensive team. We just needed the time to do it. We realized that there was some key clients that were interested if we could actually meet their objectives that had come on board. So we've been able to do that. And at the moment, yeah, we're at a point where we're not needing to take on VC. There are definitely ways we could take the product. You could build a very certain set of visualizations. You could wrap that in a web service and charge a monthly fee. You could cloudify the whole application and charge a monthly fee. We are still, and maybe someone will do that and out marketer. Definitely, we're terrible marketers. Like one of our latest clients who just came on board, they're like, "You haven't tweeted anything since like March. Do you guys still do all this?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're busy. We're too busy with marketing." That's a very bad approach, right? Like me and Conrad and Matt, we're not marketing people. So it is something we need to put a bit more effort into to better. Like we're very adverse to like sending like email, and maybe it's just our techie nature of like sending out like, "Hey, this is this week in Bimbeats, we did this and that and the other," because we don't. You sort of get annoyed. You get email fatigue like everything else, but we definitely need to improve our marketing and sales and sort of awareness approach. Like we've signed up for AU this year for sponsorship, so we're going to be doing that. We did our second booth actually for Bimbeats. We did Section Cut conference a month or so ago. We were in there. That was really cool. We all me and Matt had to get up at like midnight to help Conrad man the booth and stuff because it was based in Chicago, but that was really fun. So I think we'll do I don't think we're built very well for like digital marketing. I'm not sure what the value of like sticking ads on Google is and stuff. And because it's still a complex onboarding product, it's like you get it and probably the audience that watches your podcast gets it, right? But it's very hard for like layman audiences to really they barely get like, okay, we use this Revit thing now. Now you got to tell me that my Revit model is happy or sad, or there's some other thing. I don't really care. We've seen firms with like 60 or 70 Revit users without a BIM manager or a Revit manager. They're like, yeah, we all just work. We don't need, so there's still like this massive lack of like these sort of people in the business. In firm, like I would consider 60 Revit users in a firm a medium-sized, decent-sized Revit business, right? For sure. But this is definitely still the realm of sort of 200 plus firms. And then the more tech savvy 50 to 100 users. And like I said, like we're looking at Dynamo and Revit, but there's CAD, there's a civil space that people are interested in. But at the same time, you get the right owner in the meeting, and that's the balance. So we had a meeting with a firm in Hong Kong last week, and the CEO was in it. And he's like, "Yep, that's awesome. Done. Send me the invoice." And that was a meeting. I was just boom, boom. I get it. Totally happy. And a lot of that has been because we've started moving towards this type of experience for users, whereas previously, and we still do, it depends on the audience. We've got some quite technical customers as well who are elastic. They know the elasticity that want to see all this. But a lot of your typical firms are interested in this as opposed to like, oh, and you could delve down and do a machine learning graph and a this and that analysis. And they're like, no, I just need to see something nice and friendly, right? So we can cater to both. The challenge is understanding who you want to cater for and who you need to cater for. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because this is very promising product, but I haven't seen any GIF or small clips about what are the use cases and stuff. So
yeah, and it's very unique to each firm, right? So one firm came on board because they were just interested in measuring crashes. Another firm came in because they were just wanting to understand how many add-ons, because they had so many add-ons. Others are trying to do a bigger picture thing as well. Some are just interested in the model health. One company was like, I just want to know when, and I think we talked about this prior, I just want to know when people are deleting a level or deleting groups or deleting large amounts of things, and I just want to be alerted by that stuff straight away. And that was it. He goes and does data mining in Discover. It's quite funny. He's one of the few, and this is quite a smaller firm. He's a BIM manager, IT manager. He only uses this. He doesn't really use the dashboards at all. He goes hunting for specific things in here, and he gets alerts like when like, oh, a user just deleted like 500 elements. He's like, what? And he quickly runs and checks on those guys. Probably to be aware, provide context to these, and or virtually pings them and goes, hey, just noticed on Teams you deleted this. What's going on? Can you quickly, before you hit save or sync? And because Revit, as soon as you do something like that, people don't pick it up for a few hours. They run a print or they run a final check. All of a sudden, stuff's missing. Then you're like, all right, everyone pause work. Who deleted it? When did they delete it? Let's start going back through the previous versions of that Revit model to find out when that change happened. Everyone's like, well, it wasn't me. Revit must have done it. And ultimately, it's someone. And, I've seen things like simple things like maybe they were in a schedule and it was blank and they hit the delete button in the blank row in the schedule. But that blank row was actually 2,500 elements that were just categorized that way. Or maybe they deleted a bunch of lines in a view because they thought they were lines, but they were slabs. All of this type of stuff happens, right? But there's ability to be aware of it straight away and then engage with that user and then provide that training benefit. Hey, can't do it like that. Rather than you can do it at that point before they say, and they lose a bit of work versus like the point where the project's on pause, everyone's tools down, the BIM manager's scrambling to find and restore this file. There's a lot of frustration. Everyone's saying it wasn't them. So he's sort of getting quite upset at everyone because it's all, and whereas this allows it to become like a very private, like, hey, can I just walk you through how we're meant to do things here? Hey, can you stop work? And you can have those sort of more one-on-one direct training engagements. Whereas you see firms like when something keeps happening poorly all the time, they go, now I've got to do a lunch and learn for everybody and sort of interact. You can start to really tailor those learning experiences as well as in Teams messages. Like we've got one company when they send the Teams messages, it will send it to their channel for that project, and it'll send in the warnings you can add the link. So in the Teams, you can customize a link with the card. So you can click on the best practice from their intranet on how you would do that thing when it does happen incorrectly as well. So they're looking at those things like when a warning's detected, send the Teams card and like, hey, I noticed you did this thing. Here's the best practice on how to do that thing as well. So there's almost self-service learning by doing the wrong things. Yeah. And there are different approaches to this. Like we're sort of overlapping, like companies like Guardian do this to a different, they provide enforcement and Guardian's an awesome tool. There's definitely a different focus. They're very focused on Revit. And if you're looking for family cleanups and all of that, that's all them. You go to those guys. We're much more interested in the organizational footprint across all different packages and understanding that digital footprint and impact your employees are having, and then that engagement they can have, and then how you tailor that experience to help serve them.
I see. And I must admit, I could feel how much passionate you are about this project. And because I see we have been talking for more than 3 hours, and we could talk more couple of hours. So
we can stop it there and talk about any of the other things, or we can cancel it. It's up to you. I've got about 15 minutes left if you want to cover anything else we covered earlier. Or
yeah, that's what I was about to say. So I really like the few of the machine learning projects you mentioned. Yep. So if you can provide like quick 1 or 2 minute overview about those projects, that would be interesting.
Yeah, sure. So I guess our machine learning started off like everyone's does, pure experimentation, right? So I'll see. So we just started, as everyone did when this stuff sort of got, well, not as everyone, as some people did, where we like to tinker with new stuff. Even, we're quite active on Hyper, and that's because we're big fans of what they do. We actually use the Hyper Elements geometry kernel quite a lot for our work. So it's fantastic that Ian and the guys have made it a priority to open source that, because it does give you a huge amount of flexibility to do a bunch of things where you're not constrained to the Dynamo engine. We did look at other kernels like C3D, which you got to buy, and there's Open Cascade, but Open Cascade is really big and mature and heavy, and like it's got a lot of links, and you really have to spend a lot of time like breaking it down to just use its core thing, whereas Hyper, the elements kernel, is just like plug and play. It's very simple. You grab it, it's one DLL, you pull it straight from Nougat, and you're off. You've got lines, splines, everything. Yes, it's not Rhino, and it's never meant to be that. But if you're looking for like, I think Ian describes it pretty well. I think you want to cut holes in boxes or holes in rectangles, which is, let's be honest, 98% of AEC geometry. Then Hyper's your ticket. Anyway, that was getting slightly off track. Sorry. But yeah, so with same with things like that. So we got into machine learning just to experiment. What is it? How does it work? And started off doing the visualization stuff. So a few years ago, like there was a couple of projects, and I think we were talking about these earlier, and we could move on to reinforcement learning and stuff like that. But one of the earliest ones we did, and I think people, and I think we were talking about this a lot of the stuff that you get with machine learning is people try and, I think they try and overthink it when it comes to AEC, like, oh, how do we machine learn this piece of geometry, and how do we do this and that and the other? And so we were doing a bunch of just straight up visualization tagging stuff. So this particular project was a really large rail project with a client. And basically we'd been messing around at this point. The client came and talked to us and, oh, we're trying to validate these Navisworks data sets, right? And we've got really thousands of kilometers of rail that we've got to do. It's one project that was over 10,000 kilometers of rail. And we're getting these data sets in from all these digital delivery. We've got no idea how to check whether it's right or wrong. Our guys internally are design engineers. So how do we start to analyze this? So we started thinking about the problem. So in this case here, what you're seeing here is this is a rail line. There's two rail lines go up there. There's a palace. This is just on a culvert. And I don't know if you can see this. This geometry is like going up and doing this like Mexican wave. And this was happening all over the place in various segments of thousands of kilometers of rail. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And we're like, I don't know. Obviously, that design package is submitting bad geometry. So what we started doing was we were just running, we created a couple of simple add-ins in Navisworks where we were loading the federated models in, creating a camera line that followed the alignment and extracting all of those as images. And then we were just tagging up the images. So we just go through the images and start tagging them with things like missing geometry, incorrect geometry. So you have very basic labels. And we were using a tool called VOT at the time. This was pretty cool. If you're interested in a free open source tagging tool, this is a few years ago too. So there's a lot of these online versions that do this now automatically and all sorts of other cool things. But this product was still pretty cool for its day. I think it's still under some development. I haven't looked at it in some time because we got there's an active pull request in the last week. Let's check out the month. Yeah, okay. So not too many a couple of active issues, not too many pull requests now. So maybe it's died. But at the time, there wasn't too many things out there that could do this, right? So PyTorch wasn't integrated. We built our own PyTorch integration for this thing. But essentially, you would come through, you would set up a connection, load all your images in, and you would start tagging them. And then you could start using this to do predictions. So that's what we did here. So we basically created the thing. We would go through these, we would tag them. And the cool thing about VOT there back then, which some tools have now, but not all, is it had a feature called active learning. And if you rigged active learning to your trained model, you could have like 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 images. And you could tag like 50 of them. And then you would rerun the tag 50, would generate a mini model, and then you'd run that against the next 200. And then you would review those 200 images. Sometimes it made errors, sometimes it didn't. You correct it. And then you'd run it against 500 images. And then, so instead of having to sit there and tag all 10,000, you would tag the first lot, run the active learning, and it'd have a basic training kernel. Then you would keep running it against that. So it get faster and faster and easier to predict over all of those. And so what we'd start getting is this sort of thing. So when we started running it against alignments, it would detect like really tiny geometric abnormalities like this. So you would start to see all these geometric anomalies appear. And then what we do is we'd feed that back out into ArcGIS. So what the client would start to see is when they process their Navis models, they just run their federated model over an alignment. And then rather than having to go through all of that, they could start to see where the errors were geometrically. And this is quite a familiar experience for people to look at from an error reporting point of view. And then we started expanding this to like the alignment itself. So bend radiuses versus design speeds and checking all of that and providing that experience too. So even though, so Navisworks in this particular case just became a way to extract imagery to be processed. It had very little value elsewhere. And we've done a similar thing for clash checking. And I did find my clash checking data set if you did want to see it. So what we ended up doing, is this the right one? Let me just double check. I think this is it. I revisited this in May actually. So similar sort of thing. What we do is we'd open up Navisworks. We would go through, export out all the clashes. So normally how you just go, once you do a clash detection set in Navis, you can go file export. Once you've exported all the images to a folder, this would then start to process that folder. So I think I've still got this content, so we should just be able to play this. So for those who are not aware, Google Colab is an awesome free machine learning thing. I'd love to say that I invented this, script all by myself, and I was all super clever and did all this machine learning, amazing expertise. And the truth is, I did none of it. I heavily borrowed, if anyone is interested, from this article here. And that's what I think people get confused with what machine learning is, right? So there's two parts. There's like the part where the clever PhD dudes and the Jeremy Howards of the world and all of those guys do some pretty forward thinking. They build these new algorithms. The other 99% of us just grab some data and shove it into those algorithms. We don't invent anything. We just rearrange. And this is the same thing. So I just went, okay, well, if I've got images from clashing and I'm tagging them is a clash, not a clash, and predicting, because you get a lot of false positive clashes in Navisworks. There's a lot of things that aren't really clashes. So you don't want the clash manager to utilize those. So I'll be aware of them. So you can run this fast. And so, this is literally step by step. Like, hey, here's what we're doing, cats versus dogs. Hey, copy this code, copy this code, copy this code, copy this code, blah, blah, blah. Step by step, like how to do it. Okay, well, all I want to train is like, instead of is a dog or a cat, clash, not clash. Pretty simple. So literally pointing it at my directory. So I start running this. This is just loading in some libraries. Hopefully my data set still exists. It's been a while since I've used this. Google Colab will just be firing up. But we can talk about something else while this is running. I might just run this in the meantime. So while we can keep going. There we go. So while that's doing its thing, but yeah, it'll go through, grab all those clashes. So these are clashes from Navis, resize the image. It'll start figuring out, this is just a sample set, the labeling for all the clashes, which you've already done because you labeled them when you went through, is a clash, isn't a clash in Navis. There we go. Ooh, my authorization code. What's this? Well, I might just have to log back in. Make sure, yeah, should be right. Yeah. Oh, no, wait. I think there we go. Let me grab that and try and put it in here. Hopefully that's the right data set. Go to this URL. Oh, yeah, invalid auth code. My bad. Anyway, keep going while I'm copying this.
Yeah. So basically, it's like in the data set tagging, you determine whether there is a clash or not. So it's two types of tags. Okay.
Yeah. We just did, and you can do more, right? Like you can do duck versus this, and is it a real clash? Like you can do all of those. So yeah, so now it's going and starting to pull all that data from the drive. But again, this is a very simple thing that can become very powerful, right? Like you can add all the other metadata if you wanted. So if you wanted to, because it's already built, I think the thing with Revit and Navis that people get is like, there's so much data. Like you don't just have like clash or not a clash. You've got whether it was ductwork, whether it was a pipe clash, whether it was this, the distance from the clash. So you can embed all of those as additional weights to help make the model even more and more accurate. This is just like a very basic, like playing around. And again, it's remarkable how accurate even these basic ones. People overthink how much data you need. You really need bigger data sets than large amounts of individual data. It's more about having more and more examples of clashes than like having like mech versus a lac and this property and that property and this property. That's what the image is designed for. It's designed to, you let the image, because it's kind of already contains all that, contain all that information. And you really just try and feed it as many images as possible and keep all the tabular quite simple. So anyway, this thing will start pulling and syncing, but we can keep going. So that was one example. There we go. It's starting to load. So it's pulling the images now. Where are we up to? We'll start to see it. Okay, cool. So it's starting to do the training now. But again, this is all straight from that article. And then confirm. And we'll get down here where you can start to see it doing its training thing. But that's one example. But another example, like we did for the same client, is just the amount of CAD drawings you get where the text is unreadable. So originally we were trying to be all clever, like, oh, let's do distance from here and this and that. And we're talking to the design engineer, and they're like, I just want to know when text is unreadable on a CAD file, because we get way too many when someone stuffed up the CTB settings or the print settings from CAD or whatever. It doesn't happen as much in Revit, but can. But you just can't read the text, right? So ultimately they're looking at, and you get a drawing package of 1,000 drawings. And it's like, okay, great. I'm halfway through my work. Now I can't read full drawings. Now I've got to email someone. So the very first thing of just processing like unreadable text in a package of 1,000 drawings, like this is very simple stuff, but it happens all the time. People go, oh yeah, again, the very simple things, but they happen over and over again. It is so easy for a document controller at the end of his day, when he's printing out 1,000 things and uploading them to the CD of your choice, Pin3, to press the wrong thing, and that package then gets sent to everyone, and then they're finding all these issues with it. So yeah. So that's some examples. We've got some cooler like reinforcement learning ones. I don't really have them up and running. So we've got like a little connector like we were talking about where we can connect Revit to Jupyter Notebook. There's a LinkedIn post I made ages ago of it. You can go, it's probably my biggest one that got hits, but it was just moving a column around using reinforcement learning and things like that. That was more experimental, just playing around to see if it can be done really, which is what we try and do that as much as possible. Just trying things, whether or not they have any practical application. We try to make sure that they have a practical outcome, but whether or not they're implementable is another problem or a different issue altogether. So yeah.
I see. So
yeah.
I know you have like 3 minutes left. So
that's all right. If you want to go for another 10 or something, I'm okay, but I don't know how long you want to go for.
Yeah. So because like I think we might need to do like a part 2 sometime, because
okay.
Because you mentioned really good points about IoT network security, and like
let's leave it. We can leave all that for next time.
Yeah,
it's
that's
whole thing on itself.
Whole another topic. So I would like to end the interview with a couple of like non-technical questions. So
yeah.
What is like your piece of advice to students and young professionals who are getting started with computational design, software development?
Well, I guess with students, hopefully you're at a uni or a place that's supporting that, because it goes a long way. But if you don't, like for me, it was persistence. Like it took me quite a while to get my head around coding. I was very slow to really understand it, and so persistence is like anything. I think people try and like you always see the cheat sheet for this, shortcut for that, 3-minute abs or whatever it is. All of that stuff is bull. There's no shortcuts. If you're a bit clever and you can learn things a bit faster, maybe not. But even if you're clever and you can learn things faster, if you're not persistent, that knowledge will disappear. So it really is about being persistent and putting the hard yards in everything. And it takes time. But yeah, that's the key thing. Just try. Don't skim over everything. Like, especially these days, we've become so much of a consumption sort of setup. Like it's so easy just to consume. Like this article, you could just consume and go, oh yeah, now I know what I'm kind of doing, right? I've read this article. You don't. You need to go through and like type out this code, because the reality is for your situation, there are going to be differences. Oh, how do I log into my Google thing? Oh, how do I label this as yes or no for clashes? So it really is that persistence of not just reading, but then trying everything, because that is where you find all the little things. And yeah, that's the key. Trying anything, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that you're skipping by not trying and just reading. And it's so easy just to read things these days and go, oh yeah, I've got a good handle on that. Yeah, experience is a key.
I see. And is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
I think these days I guess it's kind of a 50-50, right? Because part of me goes, man, I really wish I did and did a software development degree or something like that. And I've done a bunch of mocks on various topics. So I've done mocks and that sort of learning. And I'm always trying to continuously keep learning is definitely a big thing I do. But no, because then you go, well, if I did software development in my degree, I would have become a software developer, and I probably wouldn't even be in this space or anything like that. So, not really. I think no, there's not too much I change. I definitely think it's worthwhile experiencing, and it depends where you want to sit, right? Because like I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. And especially as we've come to own a business and do all those things, I'm worse as a jack of all trades. So I have to make sure that I purposely put time into things like this in my time when I get it to make sure that I get some level of skill in these sort of solutions. Um, but someone a long time ago said to me, being a jack of all trades is actually a bad thing. And it isn't, as long as you are actually somewhat knowledgeable on those topics. Like if you've tried it and played, you're not going to solve the problem. But then it's just about connecting like to your Grasshopper guy, to the Dynamo person, to the AWS security database guy that we've got that you've got in house or whatever. If that's the career path that you want to take, then it is important to keep trying, and technically trying, just so you can communicate with those people effectively and empathize with their issues, right? So like REST APIs, I was not that knowledgeable on REST APIs when I first started getting used to the Forge. The Forge was probably one of the most Autodesk Forge's platform was probably the most in depth I got into it. So the first thing I did was go and do a course on how to write an API. So I wrote my own REST API. So I wrote my own REST API. Yeah, it took a day. But by doing that, you learn all the ins and outs. Not everything, obviously. There's definitely things to skip, but you learn a lot of the rules. You learn why things are done. So when you look at Autodesk API, you don't go, oh, why would you do it like that? Obviously, it'd be better doing it like this. And you can sort of appreciate why they put those things together. So, and especially now, there's this transition from developers doing computational design to desktop apps to web development. And it's a totally different field. Like security, you got to worry about sending small packets of data, you worry about, you've got these other services and they've got limitations on hardware and memory. And so you're dealing with a totally different set of constraints. And so trying to learn all of that is possible. It takes a lot of time, but knowing enough so then you've got your specialists to do that is the other thing. But on the cross side of that, like that, if you want to specialize in something, it's equally valid. So go deep. Like if you want to be the Grasshopper or Dynamo guy, you just want to go like deep, every package, explore every nook and cranny, try. Like John Pearson's really good example of someone who's gone, and Dimitar Venkov are both guys who have gone so deep in Dynamo, and like they can do other things too, right? Like they can do some maps and stuff, but definitely their knowledge in those products is unparalleled. Where and you can see that differentiated with Parallax. Like John's quite deep in Dynamo, Aaron's quite deep in the Revit domain space, right? And so they know and have enough skill overlapping. So Aaron can do some Dynamo, John can definitely do Revit, but they can cross-pollinate that domain. And so that's the synergy there. So there's nothing wrong with going deep in one or two things. But if you're going to be jack of all trades, go across the top and be at least deep in one of them. But yeah, I would say make a decision as to which one. And definitely keep trying before you buy. So what I mean by that is like, don't settle for one career path if it's making you unhappy. Like my career path, I started as a pizza guy and then went into scaffolding and then worked for a structural engineering company and then a reseller and then a larger engineering organization and then a Chinese contractor. So working, so don't, like, I've always loved the AEC space, so I've never deviated from there and I never want to. Like our core part of our business is we are AEC focused software development. We don't do gym websites or social stuff. Like that's our focus. But yeah, once you're happy, but feel free to leave, feel free to walk away from things that don't make sense. And especially when you're young, it's so easy to walk away. People say entrepreneurs when you're 20 or something is really risky. It's not. Like you don't have family, you don't have kids. Hopefully you might have a mortgage, you might have some student debt. Obviously that's a bit of a risk, but you're going to get that anyway. But you're really at a point of life where you live like pretty frugally, or you can if you choose to. And so you can make all these risks. It's a lot harder once you get families and all of those sort of things to make those risks and still provide a quality of life for family as you get older. So yeah, pick something, but don't settle. How's that?
I see. Yeah. And what city or countries in your travel list?
Man, I'm so keen to get out. I had a private goal and I fulfilled it every year since I was about 24, which was go to a new country every year. And so from when I was 24, I was able to fulfill that up until obviously the pandemic. Edinburgh was the last place I got to go to, which is fabulous. I didn't get to spend too much time there. Countries on my travel list. Me and my wife have been trying to get to the Maldives. Kids got in the way of that because we don't want to take them with us. So we're waiting till they're old enough when we can do that. So that's probably there. But in the meantime, I'd love to go to Spain. That's somewhere that's been on my list forever. So I'm hoping that things open up enough and the Build conference goes ahead that I'll be lucky enough to get out over there. So but yeah, they're probably two on my wish list. Private and then just to see a lot of the architecture and the culture and stuff like that over there. It's been something I've been trying to get to for a while.
I see. And is there any book or a mentor who made a big impact in your life?
Definitely I different books, not so much, and that's more because I read a lot of science fiction. So I have read occasional biographies or autobiographies like the Steve Jobs book and a few, but it's pretty rare. I normally like to read some pretty heavy science fiction, and it's mostly for the ideas like biotech spaceships and these. I'm reading this book at the moment called what's it called, Screaming or Burning Sun, and it's about this future of civilization that just gets heavy into VR, and there's all these levels of VR. It's quite wild, sort of like Matrix on steroids. But the concepts you get to explore are quite fascinating, and these authors are not constrained by anything, so it really gives you wild ideas to try things. So that's sort of my two preferences in terms of books. So Peter F. Hamilton's probably my favorite sci-fi author, and then mentor is definitely a gentleman called Baldip Singh. He's based for YTL when I was working in Malaysia. He's a senior architect, and yeah, he's amazing. He's designed a lot of the resorts, sort of won a lot of awards for YTL hotels. He's in charge of the architectural division there. Old school in a lot of ways, but his ability to project manage, but also conceptually conceive of a project. We did a lot of concept architectural projects together with him, and then also worked. My last project when I was working there, we were doing the new YTL headquarters, which is now occupied and that sort of thing. And KPF was our architect. We were the architect of record and managing it locally. And it's just really good sitting in meetings when we're dealing with KPF from New York and this sort of thing. Just the clarity he always had for the vision of every project. Like you see some people, the vision depends on the technology in a way. So like and there's nothing wrong with this approach, but it was always like, I'll do this in Revit, now move that in Revit, now tinker with this. And, he always just had this very clear vision. And the compromises that were made were usually based on what would you say? Based on like technical constraints that he was very good at taking in a lot of constraints as we were formulating that design. And so by the time structurally everyone got on board, it's more just wrestling with them. But not in a way of like aesthetically, it was just always really clear. But at the same time, if you were working and collaborating with him on a project, there'd be 3 or 4 of us and we'd be toying with ideas over facades and entranceways. He's so open to new ideas as well. But he would automatically be like, that's a good idea. And it would automatically slot into his mental model. And he just fit it in. There was never any ego around. There was never any ego around his ideas and the willingness to embrace others. But at the same time, when he thought it was the right decision, he would go forward. But it was always so clear in articulating that when we finally saw the Revit model or the concept and the thing, he was like, yeah, that's what I wanted. Yep, yeah. It was never like, it was more validating that we could put his concept on paper to give to other people than like, oh, tweak this, change that. It was, much more of that type of stuff. So yeah, definitely a hero of mine in terms of ability to manage a project very sensibly, but then artistically really really try and push the boundaries with the construction and budget constraints from the higher ups. So yeah, definitely a hero.
I see. So my last question is, how does a day in your life look like? You you are involved. You wear so many hats. So
So my day normally starts pretty early. I like to get up at like five-ish. Um, Consume some media, some random stuff for half an hour and things like that. Hopefully try and not let it take over too long. Sometimes you get stuck in an article or something. Then I normally like to punch out some code. Could be for Bimbeats, could be for some other products we're working on. Try and do that until the start of the day, which is when everyone else starts rocking up, either virtually or in the office. We might all be in there. And then usually it's being on hand to help the other guys. It might be there's a project we're working on, paper we're working on. So really being on hand with those guys and any billings or other things like that, all the business stuff. And then if there's a lot of meetings. Hopefully, I'll try and keep meetings to a minimum, but I'd say they take up about 30 or 40% by week. It could be new projects, it could be new clients who are interested in building something. So they're just, who are we? What do we do? All of that type of stuff. So, and then just really helping the other guys where I can. Just make sure their day gets done. Like the less impediments you've got for your software guys, your computational guys and stuff to just do their day-to-day work is easier. And part of that is like making sure there's no constraints around anything. Like one of the guys on Thursday was like, oh, I really need this bit of software. And it was like $100. And, we solved that within 5 minutes. It's like, yep, cool, credit card. It's nice when you're the boss because you can just be like, yep, done, bought, here's your license. So trying to remove those impediments, and then at the same time trying to make sure that there's a healthy pipeline of work coming through, right? Because we're trying to be sustainable for the team. We've only ever had to let someone go once, and that was because they were a mismatch for the role. There was definite mismatch expectations, so we try heavily to make sure that there's a long-term place for all our team, and fortunately we've never had anyone else go yet. Hopefully that stays away, but at the same time trying to make sure that they're skilled up. So if we ever lose people to the industry, which will happen at some point, people go, wow, people that come out of automation are really good, and that's the type of people that you want to get. So really making sure that they're ready for the industry too, when they get out there too. So be valuable assets both with us and if we're able to lose them. So that's probably my day, is mostly helping the guys get their work done, and then just making sure that any impediments stay out of their way. And then hopefully I get some time to do my own nerdy stuff too, because I still like to do it as well.
I see. Thanks a lot, Adam. It was an incredible interview. I learned a lot, and thanks.
Sorry it took so long. I yapped too
much. You have so much knowledge to share. So, and I still think maybe sometime in future it would be interesting to talk about the network security and blockchain aspect, because I know there was some conversation you were involved in that. So, but it was a great demo, great projects you shared, and thanks a lot for all the thoughts.
No worries. Thanks for having me on, and it was interesting chat, and thanks again, mate, and enjoy your evening, and see everyone else.
See you. Thanks for watching.